I'd like to go ahead and start this meeting. This is the regular meeting of the Sonoma City Council. Concurrent regular meeting of Sonoma City Council is the successor agency to the dissolved Sonoma Community Development Agency. It is Monday, October 3rd. We have reconvened from closed session. So right now, this is the call to order. And Jack Ding, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Oh, that's right.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I don't know, after 7 and some years, it's always been on that side of the chamber. I'm just automatically turning there. So we'll have a roll call. Ms. Barr?
Councilmember Hunley.
Here.
Councilmember Cook.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Agramonte.
Here.
Councilmember Edwards.
Yes.
Mayor Gallion.
Present.
Thank you.
The report out on closed session is that we have given direction to staff. Right now, we'll move on to comments from the public. At this time, members of the public may comment on any item not appearing on the agenda. It is recommended that you keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. Under state law, matters presented under this item cannot be discussed or acted upon by the City Council at this time. And for items appearing on the agenda, the public will be invited to make comments at the time the item comes up for council consideration. Upon being acknowledged by the mayor, please step to the podium and speak into the microphone. Begin by stating and spelling your name and address. Anyone wishing to make public comment? Now's the time. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is John Bolt. Last name is spelled B-O-U-L-D-T. I live at 443 Brazil Street. And the purpose of me being here was brought to my attention that we have what I would call selective enforcement of a sound ordinance. And I'm up here to voice my concern that somebody selectively decided to enforce the sound ordinance on a specific activity, and yet living on Brazil Street during our many festivals, I hear sounds coming all the way to Brazil Street, which is 1.1 miles from the center of the plaza. And I don't believe that I've heard of anybody performing a sound meter reading for any of the activities going on at the plaza. With that, I would like, perhaps if it can be discussed, if not, at least somebody look into and explain to me who is authorizing selective enforcement of the sound ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? Seeing no one, I'm going to close the public comment section. Do we have any meeting dedications? Council members? None? Presentations? There are none. So we will move on to the consent calendar, agenda order by City Council. All items listed on the consent calendar are considered to be routine and will be acted upon by a single motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless members of the council, staff, or public request specific items to be removed for separate action. At this time, council may decide to change the order of the agenda. Council members? Seeing none, I will open this up for public comment. Anyone wishing to speak on any consent calendar items, please step forward. Seeing none, I will close. Let's bring it back to council for further action, motion, or discussion.
If there are no questions or discussion, I'd like to make a motion to approve.
All right, we have,
4A, 4B, 4C, and 4D.
and is there a second?
Second.
Okay, second by Councilmember Cook. So we have a motion, we have a second. Is there any additional discussion? Ms. Barr, it's time for roll call.
Councilmember Hunley.
Aye.
Councilmember Cook.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Agramonte.
Aye.
Councilmember Edwards.
Yes.
Mayor Gallion.
Aye, so that is
Thank you.
5 to accept the consent calendar and agenda order for City Council. Move on to consent calendar, agenda order for City Council as successor agency. I will open this up if there's no further questions from council. All right. Anyone wishing to comment on this on public comment, please do so now. Seeing none, I'll bring it back to council for further action or discussion. Councilmember Cook?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent calendar, City Council as a successor agency, item 5A.
All right, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. We have a motion, we have a second by Mayor Pro Tem Agramonte. Any further discussion? If none, roll call vote.
Councilmember Hunley.
Aye.
Councilmember Cook.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Agramonte.
Aye.
Councilmember Edwards.
Yes.
Mayor Gallion.
Aye, so that is a 5-0 for consent calendar agenda order of City Council as successor agency. We'll move on to the next section, which is the public hearing, item 6A. This will, let me get to my records here. This item will be put forward by staff. David Goodison, our planning director, will take over. And the discussion, consideration, and possible action on an appeal of the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission's decision to approve the application of Studio 101 Designs for design review of the 2 commercial buildings in a trash enclosure at 19366 19370 Sonoma Highway. David, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mayor Gallion, members of the City Council. To begin with a site overview, the property is composed of 2 adjoining parcels. These are, again, located on Sonoma Highway, just north of West Spain Street. The property is also bounded by Lion Street on the north. We have 2 adjoining parcels, actually, on this site with a combined area of 12,654 square feet. The property is vacant, except for a partially completed parking lot intended for future commercial development. Adjoining uses include a couple of single-family homes to the north, a single-family home to the south. To the east, we have some townhomes and some detached residences. And then across Sonoma Highway to the west, there's a vineyard, limited commercial, and a single-family residence. This site, excuse the error in the staff report, is zoned mixed use in the general plan and has a corresponding mixed-use zoning. By way of background, in 2014, on July 14th, 2005, the Planning Commission approved a planned development permit and use permit for a mixed-use development on a larger site that encompassed these 2 properties that are in front of you this evening. At that time, the development was known as Sonoma Village West in Orchard Park, but the residential component is now called Villas de Luna. The approved project consisted of 2 commercial buildings placed towards Sonoma Highway with 6,936 square feet of commercial floor area, 8 attached townhome condominiums in the middle of the site, and 7 single-family homes to the east. Site circulation, as approved, would be provided through a 28-foot wide public street off of Sonoma Highway that transitions into an 18-foot wide private drive that connects to the stub of Palouse Street, which is to the east of the site. And the gate marks the transition of the public and private road section and is in place to prevent cut-through traffic. So the logic here in this site plan is that about a quarter of the site, that is the smallest fraction of the site, is devoted to the most intense use, that being commercial development. That element of the project was placed along Sonoma Highway because Sonoma Highway is obviously busy and heavily traveled. And it's appropriate to place the more intense use next to the highway as a screen towards the less intense uses to the east. So moving on through transition, we have townhomes again at the center of the property, transitioning to residences, detached residences in the back. Also, that most eastern element includes 2 duplexes. And then there are some open space areas as well integrated into the 2005 site plan. Construction of the residential elements of this project began in 2006. The public improvements, residential buildings, and associated landscaping were substantially completed, as was a portion of the parking lot associated with the commercial component. However, the property fell into foreclosure and construction was halted prior to final building permit sign-off. And the project sat in that state for about 4 or 5 years. In 2012, the project was acquired by a company called Kibbe Road LLC, which proceeded to bring the residential portion of the project to completion. To facilitate that process, in 2012, Kibbe Road applied for and received Planning Commission approval for amendments in the use permit conditions of approval, addressing the number of affordable units and the removal of a requirement for a play structure in one of the 2 open space areas within the site. In approving these revisions, the Planning Commission required the planting of oak trees along the Sonoma Highway frontage, the planting of some temporary trees within the undeveloped portion of the commercial property. It's a form of interim screening, and the placement of picnic tables within one of the open space areas in lieu of the play structure. And as part of this action, the Planning Commission accepted the landscaping of the 2 open space areas as complete. I would say that, I think it's fair to say that when Kibbe Road approached the city in 2012 to pick up the project, they were certainly encouraged by staff to do so because this property had been vacant and abandoned for a number of years, and we felt that the modifications to the conditions intended to facilitate the development of the project were well worth bringing it forward to completion. In 2012, Kibbe Road filed new building permits to complete the residential units, which received final inspection sign-off in March of 2013. Following the completion and sale of the residential units, Kibbe Road turned their attention to the commercial portion of the development, and they came before the Planning Commission in August of 2015 in a study session with a proposal to modify the approved commercial component by scaling it back to a single 2-story building with 2,547 square feet of commercial space and 3 upper floor condominium units. However, this proposal lacked neighbor support, and Kibbe Road ultimately decided to proceed with the commercial component as allowed for under the 2005 use permit. So we've been looking at the site plan, going back to that 2005 approval. Here are the elevations, the conceptual elevations approved by the Planning Commission at that time, including, I've highlighted the commercial buildings. And here is a closer look at the 2005 site plan focusing on the commercial properties. And here we have an air photograph that shows the current state of affairs with the townhomes and the residences to the east having been developed, and the commercial properties remaining vacant at this time except for the partially completed parking lot and, of course, the frontage and road improvements. Now, other things have happened as well over the course of the review and build-out of this project. We have as well, making use of Lion Street, the Sonoma Valley Oaks affordable development. The review of that development kind of overlaps what happened next door on the south. In essence, the city began property negotiations in 2007 with the O'Donnell family, which owned the entirety of that area that's marked out with the red lines. That discussion was concluded with a purchase agreement in 2008. Following a rather lengthy project development period, building permits for the project were issued in 2011, and the permits were finalized over the course of 2013 and 14. So Sonoma Valley Oaks was basically under construction, substantially underway, at the time that the residential units in Villa de Luna were put on the market. And the Sonoma Valley Oaks Environmental Review included a traffic study that addressed the use of Lion Street in conjunction with the complete Villas de Luna project. Now, prior to acquiring the project, Kibbe Road asked about the status of project approvals. That's a key issue then, and it's a key issue now. After conferring with the city attorney's office and the building official, planning staff responded as follows. First, with respect to the use permit, the city attorney's office concluded that the use permit for the entirety of the project, including the commercial component, remained valid based on the following factors. First, the use permit and plan development permit addressed the project as a whole, encompassing both the residential and the commercial elements. Second, building permits had been issued for the residential units, and the construction of the residential elements of the project were substantially complete. And third, site and public improvements associated with the entirety of the project, including the commercial component, had been implemented, including frontage improvements on Sonoma Highway, the construction of the public and private street, the grading of the commercial parcels, and the construction of a portion of the commercial parking lot. The building permits, however, had expired, and new building permits were required, demonstrating conformance with current code standards. And then lastly, it was concluded that the design review approval for the two commercial buildings and for the landscaping plans for the commercial lots were found to have expired, and Kibbe Road was advised that they would need to reapply for those approvals. So that brings us up to the more recent reviews of the project, specifically the commercial component, by the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission. That began in May of this year, when the DRHPC considered an application for design review of the two commercial buildings and an associated landscaping plan. The initial design concept was not accepted by the commission. The commission also wanted the applicant to consider modifications to the landscaping plan to respond to neighbor requests for improved screening between the commercial parking lot and the adjoining townhomes. Based on those concerns, the item was tabled with direction given to the applicant on suggested changes. In response to the feedback received from the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission, the applicant worked to modify the building designs in the landscaping plan, including consultations with interested neighbors. A revised proposal was developed and considered by the commission at a meeting held on August 16th, 2016. Here's the site plan associated with that review. So again, this is related to the commercial lots, and as we can see, it's extremely consistent with the 2005 use permit approval in the location of the buildings, their placement on the property, and the design of the parking lot. This revised submittal addressed the architectural detailing, colors, and materials of the two-story commercial buildings, with a combined area of 5,969 square feet of gross floor area, and that's the major change here. The applicants voluntarily reduced the area of the commercial space by approximately 967 square feet relative to the maximum allowed by the use permit. Here are the elevations that were reviewed by the Design Review Commission, and a rendering. And so, as we can see, and as described in the project narrative and elevations that were included in this packet, the design employs a mission-style architecture with stucco siding, double-hung windows and a clay tile roof, along with wood detailing and other elements as described in the packet. The commission discussion focused on the design of the two commercial buildings, the trash enclosure, and the landscaping plan. Ultimately, the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission voted 5-0 to approve the building design and the design of the trash enclosure, subject to the condition that the trash enclosure trellis incorporate a solid fence. The landscaping plan, however, was denied, as the commission felt that it was still not adequate with respect to providing screening for the adjoining townhomes. Now, this is the action that has been appealed, and we'll get to the specifics of the appeal in a moment. But it's important to understand, as the council looks at this appeal, the scope of authority that the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission had when it looked at this proposal. And this is because the appellants are requesting substantial changes in the commercial component. Going back to that 2005 use permit, that again included both of the commercial buildings as well as the residential components, the conditions of approval included condition number 24, which reads as follows. The development shall be subject to the review and approval of the Design Review Commission. This review shall encompass site plan adjustments as required by these conditions or as deemed necessary by the DRC, except no modifications substantially altering the approved site plan or at variance with the conditions of approval shall be made. And building elevations, colors, and materials, those being part of the Design Review Commission authority. In staff's view, this condition remains valid as part of the 2005 use permit approval, meaning that in its review of the design of the commercial buildings, the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission did not have the latitude to require significant changes in the approved site plan, such as those requested by the appellants. If, as staff believes, that limitation applied to the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission in its review of the commercial building elevations, then it would also apply to the council in its appeal of that decision tonight. As a staff interpretation, this is a legitimate subject of an appeal, but the condition of approval does seem quite clear. And I would add that this condition of approval is consistent with the city's general procedures in the review of projects that require a land use permit from the Planning Commission, followed by a design review approval from the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission, as set forth in the Development Code. And the purpose of this limitation is to assure continuity and consistency in the review process. So moving forward now to the issues raised in the appeal and the requested actions. On August 30th, a number of residents of Sonoma Villas de Luna filed an appeal of the Commission's decision to approve the design review of the commercial buildings. The appellants assert that the approval will have an adverse effect on parking, that the development is too intense, that a landscape buffer should be required along the edge of the parking lot adjoining the townhomes, and that certain required improvements associated with the development are incomplete or no longer working correctly. As outcomes of the appeal, the appellants request that the size of the commercial buildings be reduced, that the development incorporate underground parking, that a landscape plan be required, that the gate on Lion Street be repaired, and that the site be used for open space purposes instead of commercial development. Now, staff would like to review those requests in order, first beginning with parking and the size of the commercial buildings. The appellants state in the appeal letter that that parking problems already exist in the area as the result of the Sonoma Valley Oaks affordable development, a project which again shares access with Lion Street, and that was under construction at the time the residences within the Villas de Luna project were first put on the market. To address this issue, the appellants request that the size of the commercial buildings be substantially reduced or eliminated altogether, or that underground parking be utilized. It's staff's view that substantial changes to the site plan, such as those suggested by the appellants, are outside of the scope of design review for commercial buildings, which is generally confined to colors, materials, and architectural details, pursuant both to the conditions of approval as well as the municipal code. And we cite the section that defines the scope of the commission in instances, again, where a planning commission approval is followed by a subsequent review by the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission. And it states pretty clearly that subsequent review by the DRHPC shall be limited to elevation details, colors and materials, landscaping, lighting, site details, and any issues specifically referred to the DRHPC by the Planning Commission. Staff would also note that the applicant has voluntarily reduced the area of the commercial buildings by nearly 1,000 square feet, that the amount of parking provided for the commercial buildings is in compliance with city parking standards, and that in 2015, the applicant proposed a less intense development alternative featuring a reduced commercial area and 3 upper floor residences within a single building, but this concept was not supported by neighboring residents. On the issue of the landscape buffer, the appellants state that a landscape buffer should be required between the commercial parking lot and the adjoining townhomes on the east. Let's go back to this site plan. This shows an area set aside for a 4-foot landscape buffer between the townhomes and the commercial parking lot. This is actually an enhancement from the original approved site plan. As we've discussed, the revised landscaping plan reviewed by the Commission in August was denied. Because the landscaping plan was denied, it is outside of the scope of the Design Review Commission's approval of the commercial building design, which is the decision that has been appealed. In addition, due to the denial, the applicant is already required to develop and submit a new landscaping plan. The applicant has consulted with interested neighbors on a revised plan intended to resolve the screening issue, which is scheduled for review by the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission on October 18th, 2016. And while there continues to be disagreement as to whether the latest solution proposed by the applicant is adequate, the council cannot take action on that matter until after the design review process has been completed, and then only if an appeal of the final decision is made. As a related issue, the appellants raise the matter of landscaping and planter wells associated with the townhomes. According to the 2005 landscaping plan, these are built-in planter boxes associated with each townhome. And according to the 2005 landscaping plan, 1 5-gallon dwarf strawberry tree, which is an evergreen shrub that typically grows to a height of about 6 feet, and 1 1-gallon sage leaf rock rose, which is a low spreading shrub, were called for in each of the planter wells built into the townhomes. These wells were left unplanted with the completion of the townhomes in 2013 because the planters were not designed with automatic irrigation, and staff was concerned that any plantings might not survive through the sale of the homes. Therefore, they were left open for future homeowners to plant as they saw fit, which is what has happened. If fully satisfying this condition is a concern, then Kibbe Road could provide each townhome with a dwarf strawberry tree and a sage leaf rock rose, and they have stated that they are willing to do so upon homeowner request. However, these planter wells were not designed and were never presented as being able to accommodate trees. Moving on to the gate, the appeal application states that the gate on Lion Street, which was required as a means of preventing cut-through traffic, should be repaired or upgraded by the applicant, as it was installed with an electric motor that no longer functions. Since the gate is an existing feature installed in conjunction with the residential components of the project, it was not an element in the design review application for the commercial buildings, and therefore, in staff's view, is outside of the scope of review of the design of the commercial buildings. That said, regardless of the outcome of this appeal, staff will continue to work with the residents and the developer to facilitate a solution to this matter in conformance with the project approvals. And lastly, the use of the property as open space. As we've repeatedly mentioned, it is staff's view that the use permit for the project, including the commercial component, remains valid. Therefore, the developer has the right to proceed with the development of the 2 commercial buildings consistent with the requirements and limitations set forth in the use permit conditions of approval, including design review and the submittal of building plans. And so, in summary, it's staff's view that the issues raised in the appeal have little connection to the subject of the appeal, which is the approval of the design review and historic preservation of the colors, materials, and design details of the 2 commercial buildings, consistent with the use permit approval for the project granted by the Planning Commission in 2005. As a related issue, the appellants, suggest that the 2005 use permit for the commercial component could be revoked or modified pursuant to Section 19.90.090A of the Development Code. This section of the code is found in the enforcement chapter and would normally be invoked as part of an enforcement action of some kind. With respect to the Villas de Luna project, the city is not engaged in any enforcement action. While it is possible, as an example, that the city could bring about an enforcement action with respect to the gate, this is not the type of issue that rises to a level where the revocation of a use permit would be considered. The revocation or modification of a use permit is a significant legal action that should not be undertaken lightly. A use permit confers a land use entitlement on a property, and to subsequently revoke or scale back a previously approved entitlement raises substantial legal issues. While the appellants note that the use permit was modified in 2012, that occurred not as an enforcement action, but as a result of an application initiated by the property owner. And in any event, this process is not an appeal remedy, as it is unrelated to the decision of the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission to approve the design of the two commercial buildings. In terms of the staff recommendation, it is our view that the issues raised by the appellants, as well as their proposed remedies, fall outside of the scope of the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission's review of the design of the commercial buildings, which is the action that has been appealed. Therefore, staff recommends that the City Council uphold the decision of the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission, thereby denying the appeal. And based on council direction, a resolution will be prepared implementing that decision for adoption as a consent calendar item at your next meeting. However, I would like to note that while in staff's view this appeal does not provide an opportunity to require significant changes to the commercial component as allowed for in the 2005 use permit, staff will continue to work with neighbors and the developer to achieve a resolution of issues such as the landscape buffer adjoining the townhomes and the gate. We've consistently encouraged the developer to work with the residents on these issues, and we will continue to do so until some successful resolution is achieved. And that concludes staff's report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Council member questions. Councilmember Edwards?
David, what kind of commercial use is allowed in that particular spot?
Office and or retail. Medical office would be subject to use permit review. Probably wouldn't meet the parking requirements. Restaurant, also subject to use permit review, probably would not meet parking requirements.
Okay, and then retail meaning not like a little store, market, food market, that sort of thing? Good,
Excuse me, any type of general retail.
thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions?
I do.
Mayor Pro Tem Agramonte?
David, the commercial buildings, did you say the second floor are for residential? Is there, or it's suggested, or?
Well, in the 2005 use permit, these are two-story commercial buildings, meaning that there is no upper floor residential component. Back in (2015), the developer came to the Planning Commission in a study session. They didn't file an application, they just presented a concept. And the concept that they presented was for a a single two-story building. So instead of two buildings, you would have one, with 2,547 square feet of commercial space on the ground floor and 3 upper floor condominium units. However, that proposal didn't go anywhere. There was no application filed. The property owner developer has decided to just fall back to the 2005 use permit.
I have visited the site, and I just wanted to know something. I know there was a discussion of the land in front from the HOA, possibly a community room and a pool, and I think that's gone by the wayside, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, I
That
think
was a
that
long time
concept is, or, excuse me, I think that question might be better left to the developer, the property owner. Those properties were on the market for years. And maybe they're still on the market. I don't know the status, but it seems like I mean, I don't know what the numbers are, but it seems like it would be quite a financial stretch to accomplish that on the part of the HOA.
And I think the other suggestion somewhere in this material that I've read was underground parking, which of course makes it cost prohibitive. It sounds like a great idea, but, you know, it just doesn't seem like it's something that's possible.
Well, to take that in the form of a question, I would just say that from staff's perspective, it isn't even a matter of financial feasibility. That is certainly a substantial change to the site plan. And we are past the opportunity to make substantial changes to the approved site plan, at least in staff's view of the situation.
And along Highway 12, there are already trees. Were those put there on the property, or they originally there?
There are street trees that were planted as part of the development, and in addition, some basically temporary screening trees were planted, in essence, just to provide some visual break on the property on an interim basis.
Thank you so much.
Any further questions? Councilmember Hundley.
So can you explain to me again, the permits for this whole project, are there separate ones for the commercial development, and then there was a separate permit that did the residential component?
There's one use permit, but there's more than one permit, obviously, but there's one use permit and plan development permit that encompasses the entirety of the development, including the residential components. After that base entitlement was approved, then the developer moved on to get a variety of different permits for different components of the project. For example, the original developer went on to get design review approvals and building permits for the residences, and never did get building permits for the commercial buildings. So those are separate permits, but there's only one use permit.
Okay, Councilmember Cook.
Rachel kind of, or Councilmember Hunley kind of answered or asked my question, but is this typical to have something that is back from 2005? I mean, in the city of Sonoma, do we have very many of these?
Well, I want to say, thankfully, that it is not typical. We don't usually have projects, especially projects of this scale, fall into foreclosure, partially complete, having a different developer come along to try to pick up the pieces, and then build out the project after the residential component is built. That is far from usual. In fact, I want to say this is the first time I've seen it, and I hope it's the last, because it's messy for everyone involved.
Thank you.
I do not have any questions. Just at this point, I had discussed most of my questions with staff, and yes, I will say that this has been a very complex procedure for this property, and I have been aware of it during the entire time through its many different phases. So I think now at this point, we're going to go ahead and have the property owners, Kibbe Road, actually.
Pardon me, Madam Mayor.
Yes.
It would be the appellants
Oh, the
who
appellants. I'm sorry.
address the council first.
I always thank staff for making that correction. So the appellants will be first. And you have up to 10 minutes to speak. So that can be one person, it can be several people speaking on that behalf. But are you prepared to start now? All right, thank you very much.
I want to get this adjusted, and I don't want this to count as part of my 10 minutes.
All right, but we do need your name
I
and
am
your
going to
address.
do that.
Okay.
All right. Hi. Good evening. My name is Joan Jennings. I'm an administrative law judge working in Sacramento, but I live in Sonoma, and I've been a regular visitor here for 20 years when my mother moved here in 1995. So I know it very well, chose it for my retirement home, and I live at 868 Palouse Street in Sonoma, Villas de Luna. We, the appellants, are the residents and owners taxpayers, residents, and people who live in Sonoma at Sonoma Villas de Luna. And I'd like to have the council's permission to have these appellants who are here tonight stand up. Can you stand so we can see you? Thank you. There are others who are part of this appeal, but they aren't here. Some of them are in other states. We brought this appeal because we're concerned about the development on the corner. We've been appearing at meetings with the city and commission hearings for 18 months. And, oh, hi, there's two more. These are part of the appellant team for 18 months. Because of the validity of our concerns, 2 of the commission hearings were turned into study sessions. But our concerns have been consistent, and on August 16th, the DRC made a decision favorable to the design, unfavorable to the landscape, and they said at that time that they thought one of the 2 parties would take it up on appeal, and they thought that was good because there were issues that the city council should hear. We're grateful to be heard. It's true. We did approve the mission-style building. There wasn't much else we could do because, as Mr. Goodison points out, there's a limited jurisdiction there. But tonight, we are bringing up issues that are more important than stucco and wood siding. They are issues of density, crowding, parking, traffic, and neighborhood bad feelings. We have brought these issues up consistently every time we've talked. And as I said, we've talked to the planning department and 2 commissions. We weren't here in 2005. We weren't here in 2010. We weren't here in 2012. So we're grateful for this opportunity to try to alert the city to some planning issues that we think you need to know. As you know, California is growing fast. 1 out of every 8 people in the United States lives in California. California has more people than the 10 western states combined. It grows at the rate of 600,000 when times are good, and even when times are bad, it grows. So planning in California is important, and in one of California's premier cities, or at least we think so, Sonoma, planning is very important. Let's see if this works. Where am I supposed to point this? Oh, there, it went. Okay, thanks. Planning is about developing the city to meet the needs of the people who live here. Real estate developers and development shapes our neighborhood, so it creates our world, and we all want a world that's aesthetic, desirable, and safe. Urban planning and smart growth are the ways we do that, and tonight we want to share our thoughts about that. These are the lots. Some people say aesthetics is subjective, but our problem is not subjective. Our problem is a matter of measurement, because 50 feet from those townhomes where the asphalt ends is the open space, the open-spaced carports or parking courts, as they're now called, followed by 2 commercial buildings, 30 feet high, 6,000 square feet of retail space or commercial space, and in the middle, 18 parking spaces. As anyone can see, the townhomes are getting kind of squeezed out of existence. But these 2 lots are scarcely larger than the lot for a single-family dwelling. And when you have a lot for a single-family dwelling, you can do some things with it. We think you can do about 4 things. You can put up a single-family dwelling. Or in this area, because of the addition of Valley Oaks and the bad feelings and the concerns about parking and density, you could put in an open area for us to use, Valley Oaks to use, and the people on West Spain who are new to this community to use as well. Or you could have more police presence, which has been suggested, but we don't think that's a good idea. A third option, because residential space is at a premium in Sonoma, but commercial space is not, you could put up 2 smaller dwellings. Or finally, and this is our favorite, you could develop it as mixed use. And we know that it was intended in 2005 in the general plan to be mixed use. We know the council members know what mixed use is, but some people here might not. This definition is taken from the staff memo to the Planning Commission meeting in August, and it insists, or it ensures that it reminds us that it's to promote a pedestrian presence in adjacent commercial areas and provide neighborhood commercial services to adjacent residential areas. It's not Wild West zoning, it's planned use. People have a negative reaction to mixed use. They think it's just chunks of apartments and then chunks of commercial stuff, but it's not. And this is the city is Pleasanton, California, and it's an example of vertical and horizontal mixed use. Ironically, the buildings there have the same color and architecture as Valley Oaks, but it is true urban design. It has walkways, benches, planters, single-store shops across a large landscaped courtyard, apartments above shops, and then even a Safeway and a CVS across the large parking lot. Certainly, it's large. But this is the vision of every city, and it's even the vision of Sonoma. This is taken from Sonoma's General Land Use Plan of 2005, which envisioned an integrated design scheme emphasizing low-profile storefronts at the highway and office buildings with attractive public spaces in the interior. Here's the graphic showing that. At the top, you can see the single-story storefronts. Upper right is what the area looked like in 2005. Lower left, the artist's conception of the mixed-use plan. Well, when we started this project 18 months ago, we knew that what was proposed wasn't right, but we didn't know about city planning. At that time, we didn't even know much about the development code. So we didn't know how to fix anything. We just kept trying different approaches. We've met with the Planning Commission and with the Design Review Commission twice. I think it's important that we recognize they shared our concerns about massing, about crowding, about whether we needed commercial use, and about passage of time. But I also want to take this moment to correct something in the record, or to clarify something. It's stated in your packet that the neighbors that when the Planning Commission first considered this in August of 2015, it was a vertical mixed use, and it was, and that didn't have neighborhood support. That's not quite right. We said the same things then that we're saying now. The building was too big. The unadorned backsides of the parking garages were the front porches of the townhomes. There had been no concern or consideration for the density or the traffic or the parking. So we have consistently said the same things. We just haven't had a forum to express them. This area is the Sonoma Highway Corridor, and all the general plans talk about improving that part because it's the gateway to the major wineries, and the general plans talk about improving the Broadway corridor as well. Sonoma is moving into the future. The way of the future is with we say mixed use and developing infill in a rational and logical way. But in addition to that, things changed in 12 years. We have 43 units in Valley Oaks, 66 parking places. We understand all about density bonuses and the need for the democratic institution of affordable housing, and we're in favor of that. But it does put pressure on the neighborhood. Urban designers they talk about what drives development. Well, Valley Oaks is now driving development. It's there, it's crowded, it's dense. People are questing for the parking spaces on the street because they don't have enough. And so you would have 3 sets of people trying to use the 6 parking spaces even on the street. The developer wants to use them, Valley Oaks definitely wants to use them, and the townhomes are supposed to use them for excess parking as well. The issues tonight are about safety, traffic, density, and bad feelings. And we ask the council to study this situation further in light of the changed circumstances. The planning director's definition of mixed use couldn't be better, and that is what we would like to recommend. We want to emphasize, too, that we haven't been doing this for 18 months because we enjoyed conflict, controversy, or wasting the city's resources. It has taken us a long time to get the developer to honor any of her commitments, and she has tried to do some of them. We have had difficult times, we've been battered, we've been moved around and around. But we want you to remember that whatever is built here will be here forever. We want it to be a monument to a good Sonoma, a planned Sonoma, a safe, aesthetic, and desirable Sonoma. Thank you.
Well, that was excellent timing.
It certainly was.
All right, and at this point, then, we would be having Kibbe Road with their 10 minutes. Good evening.
Good evening. My name's Alicia Rosari, and I'm with Kibbe Road LLC, 147 West Richmond Boulevard in Point Richmond. I'm going to repeat a number of things just to kind of walk you through our process. But as stated, in 2012, we did due diligence to research the feasibility of this project that had gone abandoned in 2007 with the market crash. And it was important in that time to understand what was approved, what remained valid, and where we would need to start over. And certainly the use permit remaining valid was the defining factor in what enabled us to move forward. Based on capacity and conversations with the city and need, we proceeded with the housing element of the project first. When the housing element was completed, the commercial lots were listed for sale. The billboard depicting what is intended to be there has been there, our understanding, as far back as 2005, but certainly as far back as our ownership goes. The lots were for sale for 2 years. During that time, we entertained a couple of offers, one of which was from an individual that wanted to put 8 individual single-family homes on the property. That was explored with the city, and the city denied that, as it does not fit within mixed use and the use permit. We had another individual wanting to purchase the property, and at that point, their plan did not fit either, and we decided that we would move forward with constructing the commercial buildings. Understanding that the neighbors were discouraged by the idea of exclusively commercial use on that lot, we sat in study session with city staff, then individually reaching out to planning commissioners, and then in a study session with the planning commission to discuss the concept of doing a half commercial on the first floor and then residential lofts on the second floor. We felt that that was listening to the neighbors. At the time, the neighbors were adamantly opposed to anything existing in that space, and their request was either that the land be donated by the developer with a park named after the developer, or that the property become a city park. The city did not support the idea of the park. Planning Commission did, in fact, to reiterate what Ms. Jennings said, they were discouraged. They liked the idea of residential lofts and commercial space. But given that there was no ability for an agreement to be made to match the neighbors' demands of open space or a park, the developer needed to proceed with the inherited use permit, which is 2 commercial buildings. We have, in good faith, knocked almost 1,000 square feet off of the commercial buildings. We have, in good faith, provided a landscape buffer, which is not required by code for this development, but we did. We did, in good faith, after we agreed to the landscape buffer, we agreed to put in a trellis. When we agreed to put in a trellis, the neighbors came back and said, we'd like trees within that trellis. And we have continued, in good faith, to say yes. Even when opportunities present to say no or oppose the idea, we want to be a good neighbor, and we continue to say yes. The areas where we have communicated back with the neighbors are things such as the trees within the trellis. We need to be responsible about what trees those are. The trellis sits at the height of a walkway that's approximately 7 feet behind this landscape buffer. And we have to find a tree that is not going to make that walkway impassable. We've shared our resources of our architect, our landscape architect, to allow the neighbors to weigh in on what those trees would be. We've received feedback in terms of how we can improve garbage enclosures. We have made this a very inclusive process, and we continue to say yes, and we continue to respond to the city's requests that we act in good faith. Unfortunately, with each act of good faith comes a bait and switch to come up with a new request, a new demand, or something to continue to resist moving forward with the project. I've submitted to you letters that say things such as, we approve the new mission-style building design. Nothing much more needs to be said about the design because it sells itself. We're almost there. Your design had it covered. Now we just need a barrier, which was the trees. We continue to try to meet the needs of the neighbors. This is a mixed-use project. Commercial space is mixed use. It meets exactly what was approved. It is a unique situation because the property sat for 5 years, abandoned. We take great pride in having been able to finish this development and bring it to the city. As much as this has not been a pleasant process, on behalf of my partners and myself, I take great pride that these neighbors love where they live so much that they want to protect it, as do we. We maintain a property in there. We have the best interest of that neighborhood at heart. We've spoken with a townhome owner that shares a lot line with the commercial units. I submitted her email. She approves this. She appreciates the efforts made to provide a landscape barrier. She supports the notion that this building will provide privacy and a buffer from the highway, which is, in my understanding, exactly what the city intended when they approved this entire concept in 2005. I have here with me my architect. Stephen, do you want to speak? Who can speak to the project for the next 3 minutes.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Stephen Mosley, Mosley. I work with Studio 101 Designs. I think in my few minutes remaining here, I think the only thing to summarize or add is, I don't think I could have written a more succinct or accurate summary than the staff report has presented here. I'd like to just add that we worked incredibly hard to address the concerns, and we took them very seriously, of the HOA. And I'm proud to say that we did receive consensus and unanimous approval by the DR Commission for the changes that we did make, which involved those items which they specifically have authority to review. Those being the color and material boards, the stucco changes, the roofing changes, basically the style of these buildings, which we dramatically changed. In addition to that, we've worked to modify the landscape in such a way that it would be pleasing. And as Alicia stated, we elected to provide a buffer strip where one certainly wasn't required. I know that the landscape, some of the minor details are left to be discussed in that landscape strip, and those aren't pertinent to tonight's conversation. But we definitely are working, with the HOA to resolve those items, and I believe we have. We've essentially opened the landscape architect up to their comments directly, and I believe we've reached resolution on the species of tree that would achieve the desires of both the developer in keeping that walkway passable, and for the neighbors in achieving what they'd like to see visually there. So I don't know that there's much more to conclude on. I believe all of the items that were raised tonight in the neighbors' comments, in my mind, specifically address planning issues and aren't necessarily pertinent or representational of the decision here tonight, which would be to overturn the unanimous decision of the Design Review Board in support of this project architecturally. So,
Thank you very much. There's about 30 seconds left. Is there any final comments?
I can open up to questions if you have any questions or if you have any further comments.
My only further comment would be just to ask that you respect the ruling from 2005 and recognize the efforts that we've made, that we continue to make, to say yes and to preserve the integrity of of this development.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And City Attorney, at this point, we just are open for more public comment, correct?
Correct.
So now members of the public who wish to comment should proceed to come to the podium on this issue. Any members of the public that are wishing to speak on this?
Hello, my name's Brian Rollins. I live at 880 Lion Street. I'm here because this this proposed building will impact myself, my family, my neighbors, and my community. I also have concerns about the processes that have allowed our development and the Valley Oaks development to be left unfinished. There are plans that show many elements that have not been finished or completed with both of those developments. It has been a long time since the project was approved, and many things have happened that affects our community that needs to be looked at before this project goes underway. I am here to see if this committee is here to support the needs of its residences, its taxpayers and voters, or the interest of a developer who lives not in Sonoma. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to speak?
My name is Steve Jennings, Jennings, and I live at 868 Palau Street. And some of the issues that we've raised are not within the design review decision. It's true, and that's because of the unusual procedure that the project has gone through, having achieved Planning Commission approval in 2005. At a time when we weren't here, there was no one around to object or provide input, and then it was never placed before the Planning Commission again for a decision, so there was no decision to appeal then, and we've been proceeding on the design review front because of the path that the developer took. But because of the passage of time, we think that it merits another look. Members of the Design Review Commission thought that, as Mr. Goodison says, he's never seen one like this before, and that's why we think it deserves further consideration. Mr. Goodison mentioned that Section 19.90090 of the Development Code is within the enforcement action, but the standards there are listed to support an enforcement action if the city decided to modify the permit. And one of those is if the approved use is against public safety. And we submit, as I've made a written submission, that there is a public safety issue regarding the exiting of Lion Street onto Highway 12. It's a problem now before we're facing X number of commercial trips to and from the buildings if they're built as designed and in the size that they're designed. And so we propose a traffic study to count the number of cars that use that intersection daily and do it for I'm not sure how a traffic study is done, but do it for a month and average it out and see what that looks like. Then there's another provision, 19.9090A1 talks about changed circumstances, that if this finding that could be made when the permit was issued, if it could no longer be made, and this is the condition. The location, size, design, and operating characteristics of the proposed use are compatible with the existing and future land uses in the vicinity. And when I read that, I thought, well, Valley Oaks has come in the meantime to pressurize the area, and therefore the size. I submit that this supports our view that the size of the use that was permitted back in 2005 is too great now because of what's happened in the meantime.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak?
Good evening. My name is Nick Dolata, Dolata. I live at 856 Palau Street. I'm the president of the board, the Homeowners Association board, and just wanted to touch on a couple of issues that I'm concerned with this project. One, as we've all heard and it's repeated, is the length of time here. We have a situation that's totally unique to this city. I think it's been poorly handled throughout the course of the time because, frankly, no one was here. It was abandoned. It was inherited by the HOA when we decided to come in here, and we knew about that. But we asked for our elected officials now to stand with the community and stand with the neighbors that are living there to hear us and work with us and come with a new solution that needs to be addressed for the gateway of Highway 12. We've done a beautiful job as a city and as a town and as a county to beautify Highway 12 to the north with Agua Caliente and Boys. Some may agree, some may disagree, but stuff is getting done for the neighbors and for the community. This is our gateway. This is our beginning of Highway 12 that needs to really be looked at and addressed new and fresh, not from 2005, 12 plus years ago, or whenever that original plan was submitted to this council, and I don't think any of you, except maybe few, but none of you were sitting on this council back then, to hear about this and make a decision on this. But I would say let's look at this again, and let's start the discussion and open that discussion again. And I think my neighbors have done a beautifully job. They've talked about the parking, the density, just as a whole, what is going on in this area. The one thing that I do have to bring forward is with regards to Lion Street and the addition of these commercial buildings and garbage. We have not addressed this issue of garbage. Remember, humans don't make garbage, correct? But now we're going to be adding a building that's going to possibly produce paper, recycling, waste. If it's a medical facility, if it's a shop, a retail, they're going to have cardboard. How does our garbage truck access a already narrow street off of a very busy highway that the neighbors currently have to bring all of our garbage to Highway 12? It doesn't make sense. We cannot get a truck in here. They do say that there's an easement that will follow once the two properties to the north are going to be sold. When is that going to happen? We can put an easement in place. There is an easement and potentially an easement that the city may be able to go back and work with the homeowners to the north, to the property, to put in a secondary access road to Valley Oaks, to help alleviate maybe that traffic coming in and out of Lion Street. So I would just ask that we have to readdress this issue. It's becoming a problem. It has been a problem. And if we let this project go forward, it will be a bigger problem for all of us. I can guarantee that. Thank you.
Anyone else who's speaking?
Hi, my name's Michael Rollins. Well, if we put like one of those giant things there, there's not gonna be a lot of space. So usually we can't play then because there's gonna be no room for us to go. And the parking issue, it's like my dad has to park right in front of the building because there's other people coming in just taking all the spaces, and it's like not, even though they call it private property, it's really not. Seems like public. So it'd be kind of cool if we can build a park there, because when I invite friends we can play and do other things, because there's also more kids on the other side, but there's a really small playground over there, but it's too 4-year-old size. So if we build one there, yeah, there's going to be more trash, and when I bring out the trash cans, there's going to probably be like a whole line, and there won't be enough room for the garbage truck to get it. So if we end up with a full bucket and having to go back every single time, that'd be kind of a little, But yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to speak?
Thank you, Mayor Gallion, for this opportunity. Thank you for each council member pay attention and also visiting our community, talking with us. Very much appreciate. And during the past 10 years, we have the two major projects approved and completed in that area. One is on one is a residential, another is the affordable housing property over there. So many potential issues and accumulated impacts failed to be identified, and no mention about any resolution. We're just talking about the parking and the safety issues. And we basically respect previous approved plan, which are compliant with the county general plan and the city code. However, 10 years has passed, and a lot of the new things happened here. Traffic, parking, density, safety issues are all our concerns. Time is changing, and all the conditions are changing as well. We respect the council and to slow down and try to update all the information first and identify any issues and impacts, and then move forward. I'm the commissioner for the Sonoma Valley Citizen Advisory Commission, represent the city. And last week, we reviewed a project, hotel project, that is a very big one, and 50 rooms, a high-end hotel in the Kenwood and the east side of the Highway 12. This property was approved by the county supervisors in the year of 2004, and also environment impact report also proved, even the use permit proved. So the last year, a new developer purchased this property, huge money, and right now they want to start the construction right away. But before they do that, they come to our commission for the final review. And then we've identified a lot of problems. Parking issues, water usage issues, and the traffic, and even employees and the parking issues. They haven't addressed on original plan, so that we don't feel comfortable and don't feel confident for this project. So finally, we said, this project is not a fit for us. So the motion was made, and to reject this project, the 7-0 vote. So that is I think that is our Sonoma way. Yeah, we cannot stick with anything approved already. And 10 years ago or 5 years ago, we should look at it right now. We need to update it, and then we move forward.
I need to have you end.
Yeah, so I have a 30.
Your final statement.
Okay. So my final statement is, we are very lucky and blessed to live and work in Sonoma. And we look at the history. A lot of the sacrifice was made by the people before us. And right now, we should work double hard and facing difficulties and challenges. For sure, in the future and someday, when we pass Sonoma to our younger generation, the Sonoma is more beautiful and healthier. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to speak on this issue?
Hi, Amy Harrington, 235 East Napa. My friends, Brian and Christy, live in this project, and I just wanted to share some perspective. Right now, if you go to their house at nighttime, you cannot find a parking spot. They could not have a party with more than 3 people. You cannot find a parking spot anywhere there. And there are families that live there. So if you wanted to have kids coming. They could not have that now. So if this project were built and there was even more traffic and pressure on the parking in this situation, it would really, I think, diminish the quality of their living situation, because right now, probably because of the Valley Oaks 20% variance, literally you cannot find one parking spot at night in their complex, and that's too bad because it makes it really hard for them to have people over and for their family to enjoy having company. So I hope you consider that when you make your decision.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to speak?
Good evening. My name is Maria Pakovar, P-C-A-V-A-R. And this is my husband, Stanko Pakovar. I just want to support my neighbors because I am dependent on them. We own a 900 Lion on a 904 Lion. And as she say about the parking, also we lost one tenant because of parking. So I just want to support them and tell you that I agree with them what they say. Because I'm not totally English, I cannot speak more, but support my neighbor. Thank you.
Well, you communicated beautifully. All right. Anyone else wishing to speak?
Hi, good evening. My name's Christina Rowlands, R-O-W-L-A-N-D-S, and I live at 880 Lion Street. And gathering, there's been a lot repeated, but it's hard to hear that that our concerns aren't relevant to the case, and I understand that. But we really need to keep in mind that the Valley Oaks development wasn't there when this was approved, and it has a really big impact on our day-to-day life. The parking is atrocious, and like Amy says, it in the evening, but even during the day, 11 a.m. there's no parking. There's basically one spot for our 4 townhouses and one spot for the 4 townhouses to our west. And I like to have at least more than one person over. I encourage people to carpool and or walk to our house, but that's not always possible. And there's no parking on Highway 12. So essentially there's really no parking. There's nowhere for people to go and safely walk from there. My brother came over for lunch the other day, parked on Highway 12. There's no signage there. He got a ticket, unbeknownst to him, that there was no parking allowed there. You know, it's interesting that we're going to be cutting out these trees that they kind of just say are shade trees, but in existence are 18 beautiful fruiting trees. There's apricots, peaches, plums, and pears, and our family goes out and picks them. We make jam out of the fruit. It's a community resource. It's much more than just some shade trees, just for your information on that. And when we look at the garbage, we are currently dragging 16 cans out on a corner right on Highway 12. And typically someone will park in a space that's not a parking spot, so they'll be basically on 12. Right, it's just very, very ugly and not very safe, you know, for getting those in and out. And then when it comes to the gate, which is outside of the purveyance of, you know, what you guys are looking at right now, but you know, emergency vehicles can't get through our street if necessary. They need to do a 4-point turn to get out. It's been tied up with twine for about a year and a half, has not worked, and it creates a lot of problems for us as well. So I appreciate you guys listening to us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to speak on this? Seeing none. Oh. Hi, Isaac.
Hello, my name is Isaac Raboy, R-A-B-O-Y. I'd like to speak in support of this project. I recognize that there are questions regarding individual elements of any given project. But in the course of my conversation in my business career, where I speak with folks who want to come to Sonoma, want to provide a business or start a business, open a business, to develop any given project, the discussion of the process of building a building or developing a project that would include commercial space always comes into, it comes down to a question, if I do find a property and if I do want to develop it, what's the process? We get into that discussion. We generally talk about a time period, and for a number of folks, both local and who are from outside of Sonoma, it comes down to a question of time and how a project can proceed in a relatively reasonable time. When it comes to this particular project, I can tell you that the amount of time that it has taken, with reasonable concerns from the neighbors, from the city, from planning, has been something extraordinary. It has been a long time. It has had several iterations of meetings and discussions. I can also tell you that the demand in Sonoma for Class A office space, and that would be one of the approved uses for this building, is quite high. There's only one other building in town that contains what would be considered Class A office space. I've had several people ask me about this particular project and if and when it would be coming to market. And now that we're at a point where it is there, the folks with whom I am speaking are very encouraged that this looks like it is going to proceed. And I would encourage you to approve the project and to vote as you did in previously. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to speak? You've already been up once.
I spoke for 1 minute and 30 seconds. Can I use 30 seconds?
No, sorry. Anyone else? All right. Looks like we'll go ahead and bring this back to council. And who would like to start? All right, I think we have a question. Councilmember Hundley.
For our planning director, one of the commenters mentioned something about a change of circumstances, somehow related to changing the use permit. Could you explain that further?
Well, again, that gets back to this idea of revoking or modifying the use permit, which is a process in the development code under, again, section 19.90.090. That is found in the enforcement chapter of the development code. It's only been invoked once, to my knowledge, and it was never completed. But just to get back to the issue of changed circumstances, I guess I would question whether any of the circumstances relevant to the project have changed, because back in 2005, the adjoining properties were zoned housing opportunity. That's the highest intensity zoning designation that is available in Sonoma, at least in terms of residential development. And indeed, one of those was developed with the Sonoma Valley Oaks project, which was consistent, exactly consistent with that land use designation. So none of the zoning and general plan land use designations in that area have changed. The Sonoma Valley Oaks project included a traffic study that addressed its contribution to trips on Lion Street, in addition to those of the residential element of Villas de Luna and the projected commercial component. So those factors were looked at in the review of that project. So I am not sure that indeed there are changed circumstances that could lead to such a finding.
Madam Mayor, may I supplement that response? The governing law that pertains to the rights of property owners is very important to understand in this context. And the governing law is that if a developer, in reliance upon the issuance of permits, expends substantial sums of money in the ground to prosecute the permit granted, that developer, property owner, earns what's called a vested right to complete the project as approved. It's our office's opinion that that happened in this particular case. 2005, a use permit was granted for the entire project. There was no requirement that any component be built out before the other. So the developer was with its business judgment, could proceed to develop this project in pieces. And once it began spending significant sums of money in developing one component of this project, it vested the right to develop the project as a whole. And we know that happened. It built all the residential properties, built frontage along the commercial property, built a parking lot for the commercial property, and in our view, that vested the developer's rights. So this discussion about changed circumstances is really irrelevant. It's really irrelevant unless this project presents a fact-driven and fact-based safety or health threat. Then the council cannot modify this use permit. And the sections that have been invoked about changed circumstances and the findings that were required to be made when the use permit was granted in 2005 can no longer now be made because of changed circumstances, falters and fails for two reasons. One, they are irrelevant because there's vested rights, and because concerns alone are not sufficient evidence to support a finding of a health or safety concern or health and safety problem being presented by a development project.
So my second question for our planning director is regard to the parking for the commercial development. Is the parking calculated, was it for the entire project, or is the parking in that parking lot for the commercial use and then the parking for the residential portion calculated based on the residential portion?
The parking was calculated for the different components. And so what's on the screen is parking that is for, under the terms of this use permit, the commercial component. Now, I would say as a practical matter, at least the parking lot, the street parking is fair game for anybody. I mean, I would say as a practical matter that on evenings and weekends, people are going to end up parking there who aren't going to an office. But in terms of how the parking was calculated, the parking lot was calculated based on the commercial component.
And so this number of spaces, is that
Compliant?
compliant?
Yes.
Anyone else have questions? Councilmember Edwards?
Questions or comments? I'll just go for it.
Questions, I would say first, and then we'll go to comments.
So probably being the, maybe the only person up here that was part of this project with SVCAC way back when, I do remember the issues. I've also met with the neighborhood. But I also remember thinking about it over since I met last Thursday. We also had opposition to this project as a whole back then, if I remember right. And I know we had to fight for the parking spaces that are in there, and the open space, the parks, et cetera. But, looking at this and thinking about it, I don't necessarily see the issue when I heard the speaker on the appellant side talk about how everybody approved the design of the project. I don't know, somebody had a card of what the design is. If that could be put up somewhere, or David, if it could be somewhere where the council can see it. Perfect. Yeah, that's the same picture, correct?
Yes.
That's great.
This
That's
was
fine.
one that was
There.
presented at the design review board. I don't know where I can put that. Such things.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I wasn't sure if it was the complete drawing, but that's perfect. When I look at this and thinking about the discussions that I've had with the neighbors and listening to the testimony tonight, I think now the way it's laid out, David, if you can put the other slide up of the drawing of the existing right now. So go back to the picture, that's fine. Go back to the picture, if you would. The photograph, there we go. So currently, in fact, that's the same truck that was there the other day, I think, when I was there. So currently there's the 9 spaces that are there, and I don't know if any of those are handicap or ADA spaces on that side at this point. So that's the current configuration. Am I correct, David?
That's right.
Okay, so those are the 9 spaces. So we're going to end up, and I remember in the conversation that building, because there was pressure from the SVCAC not to approve this project, and listening to Mr. Ding and his current work with SVCAC, those are thoughts that hopefully commissioners are putting in. However, I see this this issue is when it came back and trying to conjure up the memory of it, is that these were going to be office buildings that were going to be professional doctors and, you know, maybe real estate or who knows what it was going to be, but that in the evening these spaces would be shared with the residents and the guests and the visitors and so on. And when you go down the street, if I remember right, there's 4 spots, maybe it's only 3 in that, where it says open space. I think, is that 3 spots there?
4.
Is it 4? Okay, I thought it was 4 when I looked at it the other day. You know, I mean, it's a tight project. When developers come before commissions, they have I guess, an obligation to fight for as much as they can get to make their numbers work, et cetera. But I remember those issues coming up. However, I see with the way the project is laid out, I think the real issue here is the buffer between the buildings. I remember we also talked about how those, and I don't know if they're actually 3 stories inside, but they feel like 3 stories, the townhomes. The sun on the front of those buildings, that issue came up way back, and the hope was for it to have the argument was that the commercial buildings are going to help block some of that afternoon sun from the west. But I also remember that the issue of the trees and providing some shade and some separation, that was part of that discussion as well. So what I see is the real issue here is the parking is a mess everywhere in town. And I don't think we can fix that by denying a project tonight. But what I see is that it's the buffer between the 2 buildings. And in my meeting with the city manager this morning, and we didn't get a chance, and I didn't have a chance to review it or find photographs to show you tonight, but there's some commercial properties, a company called Chipotle, that they're part of their corporate design is to build these steel walls that are this far away from their buildings, so they look natural and they look nice and so on. And they build them, you know, sometimes 20, 30 feet up, and they grow, you know, different plants that are designed to work on those kind of buildings. It also helps their heating bills and all that sort of thing. But that's, you know, I haven't seen the design. I know that's not part of our review tonight, but what I see is the real issue is the buffer between the commercial space and the other space. And I still, as I'm sure I did back then, highly encourage that when that parking lot is closed for the business, that it become a parking lot that can be shared by the residences. And that maybe there's some kind of condition that could be put in where the residents have the opportunity to park there, not necessarily the world gets to park there. But I you know, I sympathize with the folks. I feel okay. I served on the planning commission when we changed when this thing came out of, or it was sold to whoever the developer was that was going to refit these. But I'm also concerned about the fact that the gate doesn't work and it's tied up with rope, and I know that was a big condition of our conversation back then, to have it a breakaway. Otherwise, if that street was open, it would be a super highway to get into the neighborhoods on Robinson and Junipero, et cetera, and to get over to West Spain. So I think that's something that I don't know how, if code enforcement needs to do something with that, or I don't know how you fix that issue with the gate, but I am concerned that it's just tied with a rope there. I'm sure the fire truck can just blow through it, but that's not what the original concept was. But I would, you know, I would encourage that we get to the point where we can, I mean, they have a constitutional right to develop this property. They bought it. I think everyone probably who bought these homes after they were finally finished probably knew, and it was revealed in their real estate contract, that there was commercial development at the front. and I'm sure somebody will correct me if I'm wrong about that. But I think this is a really great opportunity for people to really get together and be serious about how we're going to divide this, because I agree with the residents that they need to have that feel that they're separate from it. But this entire PUD was sold as a kind of a mixed use, with the business being up in the front and these townhomes. I'm sure they're nice. I walked through them way back when they were originally nearly finished. I haven't been inside them since, but I also noticed on the outside, it seems like some of the elements are missing off of the windows, and I don't know if it actually got finished to the degree that the original plans show, and I don't know who has a copy of the original plans. But I would encourage that whatever's missing there, and some of the things were pointed out by the residents, that those are completed as well. Because I think that's the responsibility of us to finish what we approved way back when. But I'm gonna support the buildings going in, because I think that's something that I can't see a home on the front of that. It's a highway. And I don't see it really being the best opportunity to have a park there, because it's on a highway as well. And I think commercial office is something that's, hopefully something that's going to close at 6 o'clock or 8 o'clock at night is going to be in there, and not I wouldn't want to see a coffee bar or any of that sort of thing there, because I just don't think that's the right spot for it traffic-wise. Also, Lion Street is going to be, at some point when those properties sell, if I'm not mistaken, David, that's going to be a full-size road at some point.
That's correct.
And then with the right-of-way that's further north, that I think is this little line here, all of these properties to the south down to the Starling Bar, that is all going to be redeveloped, hopefully in my lifetime. But at some point, we're going to see a lot more work done there. So I'm going to support approving the buildings, or not. We're not here to approve it, but to deny the appeal, but encourage that we come back and see what the next commission does on building that buffer between. And I want to see what that looks like. I wish we had that, or we could have that in front of us, but that's not our purview tonight. So, thank you.
I just wanted to make one comment. Perhaps it would be, as a point of clarification here, the fact that we're on the appeal, yet we've had all of these concerns vetted here. Is there a venue in which these concerns would be addressed in the future, other than this appeal?
A couple of things. First, the Design Review Commission later this month is going to be reviewing a revised proposal for the landscape buffer. That's a venue, and the developer has been in contact with the neighbors about that proposal. And we've even discussed with the developer some additional ways to improve it. But that's a future venue, as Councilmember Edwards noted. It's not on the docket tonight because it's still pending in front of the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission. The gate is a bit of a different issue in that it was a feature that was constructed as part of the completion of the residential component. So it's not related to the design of this commercial building, which again is what the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission was looking at. The gate is an element that's addressed in the conditions of approval. And so the city definitely has some leverage in terms of making sure that a solution is reached with respect to the gate. But there are, well, let me just put it this way. It's a complicated issue, and we're going to continue to do our part to reach a solution to that issue. And again, we do have a bit of leverage in the conditions of approval to make sure that there is a resolution. But there's not any particular venue to hear that out in terms of a commission review at this point.
However, if I could just interject here, if this was a wish of the council to, perhaps put this on a fast track for a safety component for the residents, you would hear that from us tonight.
Yes, certainly.
I make that so.
Okay.
For myself. Now the other question that I might have for you is these, parking issues that have come up here. Is there any way to have like parking passes that are specific to the spaces themselves? Or permits?
I don't think that that would work in this context because, most of the parking spaces that the residents rely on are their very own parking spaces. So obviously they have access to those. What people are in competition for is a very limited number of on-street parking spaces. And, most residential parking permit systems are based on the idea that residents of this area get a pass to park in a certain spot. So the Valley Oaks residents are residents of that area. The portion of Lion Street where those parking spaces occur is a public street. So I don't see how you could have a permit parking system for the public spaces on Lion Street that would be limited to the residents of Villas de Luna. As Councilmember Edwards pointed out, sometime in the future, and admittedly this is not cold comfort today, that's going to be a full width street with an additional, with the parking lane on the north. And let's just look at that. And as also has been mentioned in the future, there is definitely a possibility for a secondary access to Sonoma Highway. But that could only occur if and when the O'Donnell properties develop. That's not something that can be implemented by the city unilaterally. It would occur in conjunction with the development of those properties.
All right, so
I would just add, too, that when we get complaints about parking on Lion Street, we do follow up with the management of Sonoma Valley Oaks to make sure that they are doing their job. They have a parking management program, that they're doing their job to, make sure that things are being run over there as well as they can be.
Okay, that's great. And the, I think I'm more concerned by the public safety when they talk about the garbage truck and, the limited access going back and forth. That was originally considered correct in the use permit.
Well, it was, and, the current collection setup isn't great. This is going to add not much to it. As a commercial development, it's going to generate less garbage typically than a single-family home would.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Hundley.
Thank you. I definitely understand the frustration from the squeeze from Sonoma Valley Oaks for this project. And I'm sure it's not comforting to hear that one day things might be a little bit better when the street is opened up and when the O'Donnell property is developed. But I do agree with Councilmember Edwards about when this use permit was originally granted and then it was purchased by someone with that permit, and I don't see any thing that we can do under the code to do that, to change it, so I'm gonna vote to deny the appeal for that. But I do think that, one, by bringing this in front of us, and now that's been very public, which I think was at least a part of your goal, was that you can get some faster attention to some of these problems. And I'm also wondering, as far as some of the things that would be more enforcement related, if they would fall under the purview of the code enforcement officer. So I'd be happy to make that connection if anyone hasn't talked to him already. So yeah, as far as the things that are strictly within our purview for the design review, I will have to vote to deny the appeal.
Is anyone willing to make an action or a motion at this point?
I have a comment and a couple of questions.
All right.
Thank you. One, it's interesting, I was, as our mayor, I'm very interested in the issue of garbage as well. David, I think I think you said that the design review committee is going to look at this again. Is that what you were saying, sometime in the future?
In their October meeting, the Design Review Commission is going to look at a new proposal for a landscaping plan, including the landscape buffer adjoining the townhomes.
I just wanted to mention, my husband, before his retirement, was a project manager and built parks for the city. And he learned in the beginning, don't bring a book that has every recreational structure and every color. The thing is to bring a limited amount of choices so we don't run into what I think this project has been running into over the years. And I think they're all well thought out requests. But, you know, sometime this has to end and this project has to move forward. So I don't know with respect to the role that design review has in this, but there has to be a limit to what might be offered in, you know, for everybody involved. I'm so glad that Councilmember Edwards is a part of this in the beginning because I think it's really valuable. I wasn't here, and I think some others on this council weren't as well. And so I really appreciate the history. I wish I would have heard it before I read all this package. And it was a real learning curve for me with respect to this. I know more. I took pictures of the gate. I still don't understand how people get in and out because you have to unwrap that blue thing. So I don't know how people get onto Paloux. And one last question, David, how many parking spots are there in the garage? 2?
In the townhomes?
Yes.
Some have 1 parking space, some have 2.
Okay, thank you. That's it. Thank you.
Councilmember Cook.
Well, I met with the neighbors over there and looked at the project, and I do feel bad for some of the stuff that I saw over there as far as the gate. And it brings up a really good question. We're going back to 2005. A lot of things have changed, but not enough to uphill the appeal. So I'll be voting with Councilmember Edwards on denying the appeal. But I would really like to say that I would like to see what Gary or Councilmember Edwards was saying about some buffers. I would like to see this a little bit better vetted. Seeing that gate kind of concerned me. I mean, we did get a CO, a community officer, to enforce things that are violations that are happening within the city. So I'm glad that through this I got to see that. And as far as parking, I totally understand. But the way that the land use was on this, and it is a permit, it goes back to 2005, which you know, that it is what it is. But I would like to see a well thought out plan going here forward. And I really do urge that gate gets fixed immediately.
Okay. I'm looking for either further discussion or action.
Was Councilmember Edwards and them?
I'll make a motion.
I think we need a formal motion.
So I move to deny the appeal of holding the decision of the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission.
And I'll second.
So we have a motion, we have a second. Do we have further discussion? I would just like to weigh in and state that all through the discussion of the building of Sonoma Valley Oaks, most of these concerns were also raised at that particular time. Parking was an issue. I remember the gate very well and the discussion around the gate. I know that the residents on Robinson Road as well as Paloux Street were very concerned about safety when it came to this issue. I'm looking for a resolution, certainly among the new group, to actually help resolve some of these issues that are here, because these are certainly neighbors that we want everyone to work together in this particular planned development that is currently here. In 2005, when we start the rules and we talk about the use permit and whatever in a project, whether that project is at that point built or not built, everything is considered as far as moving forward. Now, the design itself may not be particularly in place, but most of the elements concerning this, including the reports that are derived at that point, have been approved with future use. When you're coming forward and the permits are all different, you're looking at this, but the conceptual plan is there. And as we in Sonoma will be getting smaller and smaller in our areas that we're developing, this is something to take into account for any project that's coming forward. So looking towards the future is always that it's a best laid plan and that it is finished, it is used, and it is part of the city element. This had many wrinkles. Some of them were not very favorable. I remember a lot of the conversations that went around this, and some things that were not served for the neighbors. This is an opportunity in which to take something that took so long to build, to make it right and to make it work for everyone who lives together in this area. And I trust that the individuals who have bought this and the neighborhood that is here tonight are going to work very closely together to have that resolution. So, at this point, let's do a roll call vote. Oh, yes.
If I could just
Councilmember
add,
Edwards.
and David, maybe you can, you know, if there's an opportunity, I know there's been some issues over this gate, an opportunity to move that gate back to create, and my understanding is that a lot of times cars will come and try to make their way around, and I don't know if that's even a possibility. I know that's where it was originally approved, but a way to move the gate back up where it's pretty obvious that you're not going to be making that turn onto Paloux, except for the residents.
I will look at that. It's not something I could really address off the top of my head, but I'm
Thank
happy
you.
to look at it.
Appreciate it.
Okay, so with that, a roll call vote.
Henley,
Aye.
Councilmember Cook,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Agramonte,
Aye.
Councilmember Edwards.
Yes.
Mayor Gallion.
Aye, so that is a 5-0 to deny the appeal and uphold the decision of the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission. Direction is given to staff about some of the other issues in this item, so I expect that we will be advised at some future point as to those actions. Thank you. And right now, we're going to take a 5-minute recess.
Underwriting is provided by Sonoma Paint Center, located at 815 West Napa Street. For more information, you can go to sonomapaintcenter.com. Underwriting is provided by Sonoma Paint Center.
back, and we are now on our regular calendar for City Council. Discussion, consideration, and possible action on the changes to the regulation concerning vacation rentals, including consideration of whether an interim moratorium ordinance should be implemented. I believe this is our planning director, David Goodison.
I'm sorry, may I ask a question before we begin? I apologize, David. Is there a way to move these numbers or to move this around? So that 7C becomes the first, and 7A the second, and then 7B the last.
If I could just interject here, the reason that this is 7A is first is because of the fact that it was last and continued onto this agenda. That's why it is first in this area. If council is entertaining a motion to change the order of the agenda, that was done at the consent calendar and agenda order time, or that should have been done then.
Well, I didn't hear that, so I would like to move that 7C regarding the city manager choice be moved to the first position, and 7A be moved to the second, and 7B to the third. It doesn't seem as if we have a lot of people here to make comments about the city manager, and I think that'll go pretty fast. And if people have made an effort to come here to comment on that, I would really like them to be able to be heard. And if that's not so, my council members won't agree.
All right, City Attorney, is that a point of order?
That's permissible.
All right. So then that's in the form of a motion. Will anyone second it? Seeing that there's no second to that motion, the motion fails, and we will proceed with item 7A.
Thank you.
Well, if it's any consolation, I'm going to try to be really quick. Because the city council is pretty familiar with the city's vacation rental regulations. And because this is a pretty kind of broad brush discussion at best that you would have tonight on the subject. But in essence, as part of your ongoing discussion of housing issues, the council has requested a review and discussion of the city's vacation rental regulations. Although vacation rentals are already regulated and restricted within the city, the council has a number of options to modify the development code to change the regulation of future applications for vacation rentals. We've identified a couple of options. Changing the permit requirement from a use permit to a license is one of them. Under the use permit process, once it's approved, the use permit runs with the land regardless of changes in ownership. And that's the current permit approval for a vacation rental within Sonoma. In contrast, a license is a type of permit that is specific to the property and can be designed to expire or be subject to a renewal requirement upon a change of ownership. And this is just kind of a draft concept, and there are certainly legal issues that need to be explored if the council is interested in pursuing that direction. Another option might be within the mixed use and commercial zones to eliminate any allowance for converting a residential unit into a vacation rental. A third option would be to eliminate vacation rentals as an allowed use altogether. So those options are all related to the regulation of applications for new vacation rental units. The council might also consider some adjustments to to operating standards for current vacation rentals, such as, for example, some communities have taken to a requirement that business license numbers be posted in online advertising as a means of assisting enforcement efforts. And that's kind of another area of potential discussion. Just by way of a little bit of background, vacation rentals are pretty tough to get these days within a residential zoning district. It's only allowed as an adaptive reuse of a significant historic structure, and only when the funding can be made that use is necessary to support the necessary maintenance of that structure. Since that change to the rules was made several years ago, we've only had 2 vacation rental units approved in residential zoning districts. But it's still an allowance in the commercial zone and in the mixed use zone. And so we do regularly, I don't want to say it's an overwhelming number, but we do regularly get applications for new vacation rentals in those zoning districts. Sometimes those involve the conversion of existing residences, such as an apartment. More often, but certainly not always, they've involved the conversion of existing commercial spaces. But that's where the main source of activity is these days, because again, in the residential areas, it's not much of an option anymore. We have 55 legal vacation rentals within city limits today. That's compared to our total housing stock of 5,645 units. If the council is interested in pursuing changes to vacation rental regulations, it should also discuss whether the adoption of an interim moratorium ordinance would be appropriate. This is a vehicle under state law that allows the adoption of such an ordinance based on anticipated changes in development policies arising from ongoing or anticipated planning studies, such as a zoning ordinance amendment. However, in order to adopt an interim moratorium ordinance, the local jurisdiction must find that the approval of new development within the area that's being considered for additional regulation would result in a current and immediate threat to the public health, safety, or welfare. If consideration of an interim moratorium ordinance is requested, staff would develop a draft ordinance and bring it back to the city council at an upcoming meeting for consideration. So again, this item is intended to allow the council to have a pretty general discussion in terms of whether or not it wishes to amend the regulations concerning vacation rentals. If so, then we would also like you to consider, in addition to whatever kind of broad direction you might want to give us in that regard, we would also like you to provide direction in terms of whether or not an interim moratorium is something that you would like to see while those new options are considered and reviewed, because it is a process that it does take time developing any new changes to the ordinance, including review at the Planning Commission level. So with that, I will conclude. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have questions of David?
I have a question, David. Thank you. With respect to the interim moratorium ordinance, what I saw here, if in your report, which is excellent, thank you so much. If consideration of an interim moratorium ordinance is requested, staff would develop a draft ordinance and bring it back to the city council at an upcoming meeting for consideration. So that, as you said earlier, would be take a lot of time, I think.
I'm so glad you asked that question. Actually,
thank you.
The adoption of an interim moratorium ordinance can occur immediately by the council once it's presented, as long as that adoption occurs on a 4/5 vote. There are other limitations. It's only in effect for a limited amount of time. You have to re-adopt it in order to continue its effect. And the city attorney can get into further detail if you like, but the immediate adoption of the interim moratorium ordinance could occur that evening if the council wanted to pursue that direction.
That would be great. And I guess the reason I asked that is if people would be, queuing up, waiting for that to happen, and there would be a queue of places that wanted to do that to get through in time. Thank you so much.
Any other questions for David? With that, I'll go to public comment.
Hello again, Council. Larry Barnett, 637 5th Street East. I'm pleased to be able to come before you on this item, which was continued, as you know, from the last meeting. Let me first say that I submitted a letter to you, and hopefully you've had a chance to look at it. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I just want to touch on some of the salient points. I actually want to begin just by saying that my reasons for having concern about vacation rentals was misrepresented to this council during your hearing pertaining to the vacation rentals at Sonoma Court Shops. At that hearing, Mr. Redmond indicated that my objection to the vacation rentals was because I didn't want to have any competition for my bed and breakfast. Unfortunately, his research was as shoddy as far as I was concerned, his arguments in favor of why he wanted to do vacation rentals, because my wife and I sold our interest in that bed and breakfast 13 years ago, and in fact have no interest in any lodging establishment of any kind since then. I don't know if that should reflect back on the veracity of anything else he had to say, but I thought it was pretty tacky. In any event, I'm up here to, first of all, give you my support for the idea of the moratorium. I think all the ideas that David has brought up are interesting to explore, but I don't think they can be done in a hurried way. And my concern is that unless a moratorium of some sort is put in place, that other applications are going to come through, and it's going to be very difficult to halt the processing of them. I think that with regard to the police power of the council pertaining to health and welfare of the community, it's a very broad power. In other words, the welfare of the community can be interpreted by the council without citing a specific cause of an accident or risk of injury or other things that one would think of generally as human welfare. This is my understanding of it, having been on the council, is it's a much more generalized view of what's good for the community or what is harmful to the community. Lastly, I'm going to just refer you to the two maps that I provided with my letter. One of them is a VRBO and the other one is Airbnb. If you look at these in a cursory fashion, and they don't give the addresses, but there is a way to get the addresses. If you sign up as a member of either one of these as a user, you can get the details on these properties. Just a cursory examination shows, first of all, that the two maps don't match, and that there are plenty of them marked in purely residential neighborhoods that are not in the historic zone, are not historic houses, and are not in the commercial zone. I would urge the council, in your consideration of the legal issues pertaining to vacation rentals, to please put some effort and energy into your enforcement officer dealing with the illegal vacation rentals as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Charles Metz, and I live at 4037 Sinead Road. I'm actually here to speak on behalf of people who've opened their home to short-term guests on websites like Airbnb and have received cease and desist notices from the city of Sonoma. She is an elderly woman on a fixed income who needed extra income to make ends meet. She looked into renting out a room in her home and found out she could get maybe $500, $600 a month for her spare bedroom, or maybe $700 or $800 if she gave up her room with the adjoining bathroom. But this would mean her family could not visit and stay with her on the weekends or the holidays anymore because the room was rented on a monthly basis. Until she heard about home sharing on sites like Airbnb, where an individual can make a room available to a guest on a day-by-day basis. She did this and asked $75 a night, and voila. In no time, she not only was making ends meet, but she could still have her family come up and visit her on the weekends and holidays whenever they wanted to come over, until she received a cease and desist letter from the city of Sonoma. So now this elderly woman is facing having to sell her home because renting her room out on a monthly basis doesn't generate enough money, and because of the cease and desist letter, she's scared to speak to you personally tonight because she never meant to break the law in the first place. That's just one of many stories. I live in the city of Santa Rosa. In August of 2013, my partner of 22 years retired from CAL FIRE with post-traumatic stress disorder and decided to leave me and move to Hawaii to find himself. I was left to pay all the bills and support my son and disabled nephew who live with me. On Tuesday, August 2013, a friend of mine visited me and I showed them my home, and they commented, "Wow, your home looks so nice. Have you ever thought about opening up a bed and breakfast?" I told them, I kind of actually thought about it, but didn't know where to start. And they said, well, there's this website called Airbnb where regular people can list a room they have available. So that day, I bought a camera, took pictures of my home, put them up on Airbnb, and by that Friday, I was completely full. Because the Santa Rosa Marathon just happened to be taking place in town, and I've been able to support myself and my entire family ever since. It's now 2016. My partner has moved back, and we celebrated our 25th anniversary this past September, and together we found new happiness opening our home to Airbnb guests. And my story is just one among many. I belong to the Sonoma County Coalition of Hosts, and for myself and the vast majority of people I know, this has been an economic lifeline to keep their own housing affordable. Without this, many would struggle to stay in Sonoma County. So I am encouraged that the City Council has contacted the county and asked them about vacation rentals. And I hope you look and see not only how the county has regulated vacation rentals, but I also hope you will see how the county has allowed hosted rentals, which are simply a room a host can make available to a guest on a nightly basis.
Thank
And
you.
not only, okay, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jim Bohar. I live at 299 First Street West here in Sonoma. Mayor Gallion, members of the council, thank you. These are some of my personal observations about VRBOs. Listening to David Goodison's introduction, there's a lot I have to learn about this. I have not studied the documents carefully, but this is kind of my personal experiences. I've been following the VRBO discussions in San Francisco and the growing controversies there, mostly through the Chronicle for the past couple of years. I believe that VRBOs got started, as the previous speaker talked about, individual owners and renters renting out rooms in their property for additional income. But the coming of the internet has allowed the marketing of these properties to be very easy. And this allowed some people to control multiple properties and make a very good living out of running a business with multiple units, houses, apartments to rent. And some of them are making a very comfortable living as their primary job doing this. I have a 3-bedroom residence in my own neighborhood that's being offered as a VRBO. It's well managed. We know the managers well. They don't live in Sonoma. They live out of the area in other part of Marin County. They're very nice people. They manage the property well. The average rental rate is $400 a day, and it's a 2-bedroom, kind of an office, maybe a 3rd bedroom kind of a unit. From their website, we estimate it's rented about 80% of the year here in Sonoma, very high occupancy. That equates to $9,700 a month. About $117,000 gross scheduled income. That's an awful lot of money. So they have a very good business. Because of the rental income, these investors can pay more than you and I can pay to buy a house to live in as a residence. This has some effect to driving up the cost of general housing in our town. It also takes long-term rentals off the market. What investor would enter into our rental market when he could get $9,700 a month from that unit? There are VRBO operators in Sonoma with multiple properties. I've tried to do some research. I can't. That can be done. I couldn't do it. But I know people who have several to 4, 5 different properties that they control, and they run them through VRBO or Home Away from Home on one of those websites. I don't know, and we don't know right now what impact that has on our housing market, but it certainly has some impact on the housing sale market and the rental market. The VRBO in my neighborhood is really 3 separate hotel rooms. People are walking up down my private driveway, and I don't know who they are. They're strangers. Often, most of them are very nice.
Mr. Bohar, we need you to close.
So I have strangers, not neighbors. And the social cohesion of our neighborhoods is really a fundamental element of our town. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Kathy Harold. I live at 492 Engler Street in the town of Sonoma. And believe it or not, I am not the senior that Charles was talking about that's afraid to come here, but I am a senior. And I am here to promote hosted vacation rentals and to explain the difference of a hosted vacation rental. It seems as though hosted vacation rentals has been lumped in with regular vacation rentals, like the gentleman who was speaking of having a vacant home and renting out the entire home or 2 to 3 homes. When my husband passed away, I came to a very large challenge of how I was going to continue to make our mortgage payment and to keep our home. For the last 3 years, I have offered a hosted vacation rental to be able to pay my mortgage and keep my home. A hosted rental is a room and a bath in my home where I actually live and rent to 1 or 2 guests. This all was going wonderful until last week when I received a letter and was summoned to a hearing where I was informed that it was prohibited for me to continue on Airbnb in a shared vacation rental, even though I've had 3 business licenses 3 years in a row and have been paying top taxes. Just to note, both currently the City of Napa and Petaluma have approved hosted vacation rentals. Legally, I can keep my Airbnb listing for stays of 30 days or more, but that, of course, would not pay for my mortgage, and also the city would not receive any top tax from those stays. I ask that you consider hosted vacation rentals even on a trial basis. The positive of that consideration would help people, especially seniors like myself, keep their home, and for others, maybe not to lose their homes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Fred Allebach, 19550 8th Street East. I have a point that the Airbnb and the vacation rentals is a symptom of some of the negative costs of being a very attractive tourist destination. And they probably don't have this problem at Alturas, I wouldn't guess. But so this is a symptom of us being a super attractive destination. It's just one of many costs of tourism that I'm very glad that this is being weighed as a cost, because it seems like mostly we just hear about benefits and not costs, but some of the other costs are low-wage service jobs and the high rents that come as a result of us being such a popular destination, as Jim Bohar said, that it's eroding the housing stock in the town. So that if people can make that kind of money on one of these things, that makes Sonoma into a tourist destination more than a town. And so this I can see how people would want to do it, but this is a small town that has a history of neighborhoods and community. And so I'd like to also point out that bed and breakfasts have to comply with all sorts of regulations and health and safety aspects, which Airbnbs don't. So there's a health and safety aspect there that they're avoiding, and it's kind of unfair competition that you have the older brick and mortar establishments being undermined by the new internet economy. And so this is something that comes out in other ways with the internet economy, and so you're kind of caught betwixt new technology and new ways of being, and so now's the time that you can stick up for a town and not have it turn into it being more tourist costs. And I could refer you to a blog post that I put on my blog in the Sun today about sustainable tourism, and that vacation rentals are a symptom. And if these things were all framed as part of a sustainable tourism initiative that the city had going, then this would come under a larger frame, and it would make more sense than addressing it as just vacation rentals or just low wages. But it could come under the context of sustainable tourism, where we would weigh all the costs and benefits of the economy that we have. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Jack Wagner, 270 West Napa Street, apartment 9. Obviously, I've brought up my support for a moratorium previously. Something that was said is that this is a 35-year-old housing crisis, which would mean that I have not known a Sonoma that is not in a housing crisis. That's my entire life right there, that I was born into this. Something that came up from people is this need for like a resolution declaring some sort of housing emergency or acknowledging that we're in the middle of a crisis. I would offer that why don't we make a moratorium the resolution, and why don't the de facto stipulations be that we address the housing issues before we readdress how vacation rentals fit into this town. No cause evictions, a solution for our homeless population, the illegal rentals that are out there. And then we can talk about where vacation rentals may fit in once we start talking about the urban growth boundary and the general plan in general. And actually, I do know the history of Airbnb. It started off as a service of inflatable mattresses during a convention in San Francisco. That was how that business started. So it's obviously far different than what the original model was. So yeah, thank you for having this on the agenda, guys.
Thank you.
Amy Harrington, 235 East Napa Street. I just want to point out the fact that if we have 55 vacation rentals approved right now, that is the size of a relatively large hotel. So we've already approved one large hotel, and every new group of vacation rentals that we approve is adding on to an even larger hotel. So I would like to see some amount of a break and consider what is the number of vacation rentals we want to have in this town. And decide that before you just keep approving more and more, adding on to that large Airbnb hotel. And that doesn't include the vacation rentals that are not permitted. But before we go one by one approving, I'd like to see a plan about what you would like to have ultimately happen in this town. And then each vacation rental in the future, whether we have them or not, can be part of that larger plan. And my sister was just here from Oahu, Hawaii. In her town, she lives on the North Shore of Hawaii, there are 1,200 vacation rentals now because they never had a plan. And now there are very few locals that can live there. So I think taking a break to figure out where we want to go is definitely the right direction. I'm glad that you're considering that tonight.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak on this issue? We'll bring it back to council. Councilmember Cook.
Well, I'd like to start off by saying that we have two issues. The number one issue is the illegal vacation rentals that, if anybody knows me, knows that I can't stand them, and probably one of the reasons that we have the enforcement here in Sonoma. I would like to see zero. I feel bad when I hear stories, but I hear stories on the other side. Families not being able to live in Sonoma. And sitting on the council for the last 4 years, I've dealt with a lot of these issues with the illegal vacation rentals, and it's taken 4 years to get where we're at. The other issue is the permitted, the ones in the historical district. I am supporting an interim moratorium ordinance immediately. We can't wait for a plan. We have to do it now. We had our planning commission have to make decisions based on our general plan because that's what it says. And when the court shop vote came, it was a hard vote, and I got beat up pretty hard, but I was going by what this city ordinances were. So I am so happy tonight to be supporting this because we are in a housing crisis. I've met with a lot of individuals. Some people say it's a housing emergency. I probably agree with that. I mean, it's an issue. So I would like to see a cease and desist and this moratorium get put in immediately until we can figure out our crisis.
Yes, Councilmember Hundley.
I would also support a moratorium tonight to give us time to flesh things out. But beyond that, I support not letting any additional vacation rentals in Sonoma in residential, mixed use, or commercial. The one small category that I would like to discuss further would be adaptive reuse of historic structures where we're at risk of losing the historic building. That is something I would like to leave for a future situation. I don't know if it'd be too complicated to have that one exception. But my reasoning for no additional vacation rentals, one, I think 55, as Ms. Harrington pointed out, the size of a large hotel is, pretty good for a town our size. As everyone knows, I am fiercely concerned about our housing situation, and I can't watch another unit that has a potential residential use go to be a vacation rental. But on the commercial side, I think that there's a different compelling argument, and that is our similarly limited space, but also our constant quest for a little bit of economic diversity. And I fully acknowledge that we're a tourist-based town, and that is why I support our carefully planned tourism, which would be our hotels. So I would like to, in the interest of proper planning and trying to use our tourist-based economy in a way that fits into our city, I would like to just wipe out any possibility of additional vacation rentals. And to address the subject of home sharing, which I remember came to the council right before I was elected, but I mean, the economic reality is that's going to constantly drive up prices. That's why people in San Francisco, I know people that are doing it too. They would have had a roommate, but now they have an Airbnb room, and suddenly that's the only way you can even afford to have a home there. So that is not something that I would like to consider reopening. And then the other thing that Mr. Goodison brought up was additional requirements, like for our vacation rentals that are permitted, requirements like posting the license numbers on website. If there are other little tools like that, which would make it easier for our code enforcement officer to enforce the vacation rentals that we do have, I would like to consider those to make enforcement a little easier.
Okay, Councilmember Edwards?
So I'm going to support a moratorium as well. There are 50 or 55, whatever the number is in town, but there's at least 150 to 175 just outside our borders. And I know where a lot of them are, and I've investigated them a little bit. But I also understand that we have our code enforcement has actually been active working on this for the last couple of years, and I don't remember what the numbers are, but there's 40 to 50 illegal units going on. Is that correct, Carol?
Yeah, through Muni Services, we've tracked down 50, and now with our code enforcement officer, they're actively working them as well. So we're kind of coming from two different directions.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to support it, and I'm looking forward to further conversations. I do believe with some of the historic buildings we have in town, there may be some opportunities. I know we had one on 2nd Street East quite a while ago when I was on Planning Commission that we approved. And I think there was a minister living in the house, and it was one of those classic bed and breakfast kind of things. And I can see there's probably a couple of buildings, not very many in Sonoma, that would qualify for that at this point. But you never know what's going to happen with our economy, et cetera. And if you had one of the big Victorians on 2nd Street, I'd hate to see one of those have to go away because of where they couldn't keep them up. And, I would see that as a potential B&B at some point. So I'm going to support the moratorium and look forward to hearing from the rest of the council.
Okay.
So,
Madeline?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I do support the moratorium now that I know it's not a lengthy process. I read this and didn't understand that, but I'm really appreciative of it. And I know there was discussion of a housing emergency, and one of the things we've talked about before was the SHARE program here in the county, and I'm hoping in some way we look at that. where people are able to share their residences with people, with like people, someone who they can work with, and they can share the housing. And I don't want us to forget about legal aid. You know, they're the ones that are out there on the front lines working with no-cause evictions. And of course, we have also hired municipal, I think it's Muni Services, to identify the homeowners who are doing this, and as well as our code enforcement officer. And I think for the very reason that Mr. Bohar spoke, that's one of my big issues, I believe, about ruining our neighborhoods. And you know, I've said this before, Airbnb, all the others, Uber, Lyft, so awesome, so absolutely wonderful. You know, they're so great. Municipalities can't catch up with them because guess what? They don't go by the rules. This is the whole new generation. Let's not go by the rules. It's sort of like, you know what we'll apologize later. And I think that's exactly how we've been caught. It's not uncommon where Sonoma is. All the cities, the counties are in the same position because we need to catch up with the technology that's being used for this. So Mr. Bohar, you're correct. You know, we have the internet now, and that's how people get these places. So I do support the moratorium, as I questioned the length of it, so I appreciate that, David, that you explained that.
And I'll just go ahead and give a comment or two, and then I'll be looking for a motion. One of the things when we started down this path of exploring with Muni Services the illegal vacation rentals was because of the boom that was happening in vacation rentals. And it's complaint-driven by people who are living in neighborhoods who houses are vacant, and suddenly there are people renting them on weekends. And, you know, I myself even have walked and inquired of someone who was there, you know, myself discovering it. This is not an uncommon action here in town. And for me, that was very concerning because, number one, it was illegal, it wasn't registered with a business license, and the city itself was not receiving the transit occupancy taxes. So something had to be done. Thank you, Carol, for getting on board with that and, you know, our many years of this particular process. And the council at that time was very supportive of this particular process because it was a constituent request. Neighborhoods were becoming very disjointed, and people felt that things were going on there that obviously was not indicative of a neighborhood characteristic. I myself am definitely in support of this interim moratorium ordinance, and I believe that when you are talking about things being advertised on the internet, there has to be a way to track this, that both the internet services, because there's been discussion as to whether they've been approved by the city, are they legal or are they not legal, and certainly in the insurance requirement alone. How many homes, you know, are actually, do the insurance companies know, and they have lending and they have mortgages. There's a whole cascade of things that can be falling down. And when you talk about the welfare of a community, it is about the stability in which the housing actually exists. It is absolutely essential that this be put forward and on priority for me. If I was to look at the opportunity, taking what Councilmember Hundley said, my idea was that, you know, if they're authorized, whether they're grandfathered in, whether we currently have them in file or whatever, there has to be an identifier that is used if they are advertised. And whether that's a license number or some other vehicle, that at least would be a recognition of doing that. I don't know if that's something you could look into, but I certainly would like to see that as a possibility. Adaptive reuse, I do agree in that particular category. We have had an appeal here over on West Main Street where we went ahead and made that happen because it was part of a very unique and distinctive destination. This would actually be handicapped on the first floor, which is something that you don't normally see in a vacation rental, something that is unique and distinctive to the city of Sonoma, and well within the boundaries of the area. I do feel this home sharing needs to be discussed, and that's going to need a bigger venue than just a temporary moratorium. So I think we might be going back to the drawing board on that, and I'm sure Best Minds in Sonoma will be on that issue as well. So I think those are my comments for this, other than saying that I would prefer to have this changed from a use permit to a license, something that does not run with the land. This is something that in the future still has to go through the process of the Planning Commission if that's part of the requirement there. But it is something that can be revoked should some actions necessary cause it to do so. It has its process, and I'd like to see what that would look like as well. So with that, is someone willing to make a motion? Yes?
No, I think this is really,
A comment?
no, I have a comment. I would like Councilmember Hundley to make the motion because
Okay,
I
then
think you're a most.
I'm calling on Councilmember Hundley. Thank you.
As a point of clarification, I'm going to make a motion about the moratorium, but beyond that, is it just, have you gotten your direction?
Well, if you give a specific direction to develop the moratorium, I mean, that's kind of what we need to get that ball rolling. With respect to the other options that were identified in the staff report, I mean, some council members have talked about them more or less. On a separate track, we would kind of flesh those out some more and come back for some further discussion of those different options and get a little more specific direction from the council before we went on to the Planning Commission.
Okay. So I would like to make a motion to direct staff to prepare an interim moratorium pertaining to applications for vacation rentals. Is that sufficient?
That's it? All right, and
Second.
looking for a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, so we have Mayor Pro Tem Agravante seconding. Do we have any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, we will go for a roll call.
Councilmember Henley,
Aye.
Councilmember Cook,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Agramonte,
Aye.
Councilmember Edwards,
Yes.
Mayor Gallion.
Aye, so that is a 5-0 vote for a temporary, no, it's an interim moratorium ordinance to be developed by the council. Correct? Back to the council, correct. All right. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to item 7B. Discussion, consideration, and possible action to approve transfer of City Sonoma Clean Power electrical accounts to 100% Evergreen. That will be our city manager, Carol Giovanano.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Gallion, members of the City Council. I'm pleased to bring this item forward. By way of background, on July 15th, 2013, the council approved an ordinance authorizing Sonoma Clean Power to implement community choice aggregation program for residential and commercial accounts in the city of Sonoma, including all city electric accounts. In May of 2014, the city received notification that the city electrical accounts had become eligible to participate and that SCP service would start automatically with the basic Clean Start service, which constituted a 36% renewal energy rate. At that time, the city opted into the Clean Start program. Currently, the city maintains 42 total electrical accounts for all city facilities. With the city's focus on climate protection and the council goal to expand focus on elements of the Climate 2020 plan targets and to lead by example with the Sonoma community, staff has been doing an evaluation of the conversion of city electric accounts from the Clean Start program to the Evergreen program. The Evergreen program is 100% renewable power. It's a premium of about 11% over the cost of the average Clean Start service. Staff had delayed the evaluation for a period of time due to our conversion to the LED streetlight upgrade project, as that's the largest consumer of energy in our program. The LED project has been completed, and the energy bills are typical enough to allow for an estimated annual usage calculation. Staff contacted SCP to complete the data calculations necessary to evaluate the conversion and the benefits to the city. So we have completed the analysis. The estimated annual increased cost, there will be an increased cost to the city to convert to the 100% evergreen renewable energy, is estimated to be approximately $19,200 annually. The cost would be spread approximately $6,500 to the general fund increased cost, $8,500 increased cost would be attributed to the gas tax fund, and $4,200 attributable to the water fund. And I would like to report that I received an email today from Jeff Cyphers, who is the Chief Executive Officer from Sonoma Clean Power. I'd like to read this as I let him know that this item would be on the agenda tonight. And he said, "This is terrific, Carol. I apologize I cannot personally attend the meeting tonight, but please let the council know how proud we are of Sonoma's leadership. If approved, you, Sonoma, will be the first city to put all accounts on 100% local renewable power. If this passes, we will find a good time to come and report on the impact of the decision in terms of dollars invested in greenhouse gas emissions saved." So with that, I would like to recommend to council that you approve and give authority for staff to make the conversion to 100% evergreen program. I think this is an investment in the future for the city. I think it shows leadership to the rest of the residents in the business community. I believe that, while this is increased costs to the city, I think that we can find the capability to absorb this into the city budget. We'll make the modification as part of the mid-year budget update. And I think this is an investment in the future, and I would recommend council approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions of staff? All right, it looks like there's none, so let's go to public comment on this item.
Hi, I'm Fred Allebach at 19550 A Street East. And I didn't know this was going to be on the agenda tonight, but I'm just really excited about this, and I think it's an excellent move, and I couldn't support it more. This is going to put us first in the county to make us a leader, whereas in Climate Action 2020, we were last. This is going to go a long way to bringing us to the top of the pile and to making us an example for the rest of the cities in the county, and also to make an excellent example to residents to switch to evergreen. I have clients in town who I say, why don't you get evergreen? Then you could get electric leaf blowers, electric weed whackers, and battery powered, and have your workers charge them. And then you're 100% carbon neutral for the use that you're doing at that time. The community choice aggregation is going to go a long way to bring Sonoma where it should be with the other cities in the county with Climate Action 2020 when that gets going. And the community choice aggregation is part of Climate Action 2020 measures. So if you do this, then you're going to be actually adding a measure that will add to the metric ton of carbon CO2 equivalent. So you're going to bring the Sonoma number up, and it's going to be good. So I think this is the city being proactive at a time when it's necessary to be proactive with the Climate Action 2020 lawsuit in place. So I think it's just a great move, and if the city has it, they can put electric car charging. That's 100% carbon neutral car charging. the Public Works can move to get more electric tools and battery charging tools so that Public Works will have a neutral carbon effect over time. The city's vehicle fleet, if you got electric, you could charge off of your Evergreen and you're 100% neutral. So I think it's just a great idea, and I would 100% approve of it.
Thank you very much, Fred.
Well, this item combined with the last, if you approve this, is a bat in 1,000 tonight as far as I'm concerned. And I really relish the opportunities to feel proud of the city of Sonoma, and when it takes a leadership position. And Jeff Cipher's letter indicates to me that this is going to be noticed and that we can justifiably be proud. And I'm also proud of city staff for supporting it, and I thank them for it. I think it's just terrific. So I hope you'll move ahead with it.
Thank you.
Tom Conlon, I'm a local business owner and representing Transition Sonoma Valley here tonight. I have a business on 393 West Napa Street. I am rising in support of the proposal as well. Moving first and leading by example, brilliant ideas. I've actually seen this happen numerous times before, where in the organic industry, the most profitable farmers are those who decided to go beyond the norm. In the home building industry, the same thing happened with the Energy Star home builders. And I'm very excited to see Sonoma stepping up to the plate as not only the first community in the county, but I believe the first community in the state to take this commitment as a matter of public policy. You mentioned that it's going to cost $19,000 a year. We're a small city, so it's really just a trivial drop in the bucket to the challenge of fighting climate change. But it is very symbolic, and leading residents and businesses to follow suit is what you guys are really doing right now. So, in fact, it's already having an effect. I texted my wife, and she signed up tonight. So we've already signed up at work, but she signed up at home. I'm curious how much we're saving from the LED streetlights, because that actually reduces what otherwise the cost would be. And I think getting more parties on board at this time helps Jeff and the Sonoma Clean Power team purchase a bigger contract from the geysers or build out more solar contracts as they're planning to do. So the way that those guys procure power is in chunks. They don't just buy RECs on the open market. They procure in chunks. So if we can get a batch right now, Jeff will be able to buy us a bigger batch. Thank you for your consideration of my comments.
Thank you.
Jack Wagner, West Napa Street. Yeah, I support this. Sonoma Clean Power was one of the first things I came here to advocate when I moved back into town. Been very supportive of it, with the expansions to Mendocino as well. I'd be interested in knowing the opportunities of working with Skype to finance solar power for some of the properties that the city owns to offset some of this, or even just add to that reduction in carbon emissions and leadership when it comes to climate change. Charging stations like Fred talked about would then really line up. You know, you could have solar panels on the library and a charging station there, all part of this green renewable cycle. This is awesome, and I really appreciate everyone who's worked on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to comment? Okay, I'm going to close the public comment section, and Councilmember Cook.
Well, I'd like to start off with thanking Fred Elleback. He's actually being humble because he was the one that sent the email over kind of explaining all this, and being a board of director of Sonoma Clean Power for the colleagues on the council has been great. And I totally support this, and just tell people, if you want to know more about Sonoma Clean Power, feel free to give me a call. It's a great organization, and in the last 2-3 years, it's amazing what has been achieved. And I'm hoping that this leadership, if approved, will get the other cities to do the same. So I will be supporting this.
Councilmember Edwards, and then Mayor Pro Tem Agramonte.
So I'm going to be supporting it as well. I'm not fond of paying more money for things, but I figure we'll probably get $250,000 to $500,000 in free advertising for Sonoma out of this. So I think it's a good investment. I know with some of the speakers earlier, we put a solar system on our home, and it's paid itself off in exactly what they said, about 6.5 years. It was a $30,000 project, and I'm very proud of the community to take this step. But I think we're getting some value back for it, so that's why I'll support spending a little more money. Thank you.
Madeline?
Nothing. Thanks.
Okay. Councilmember Hundley?
I will very proudly support this, and I'm hoping that there's more people watching out there, or maybe reading the newspaper, that will Google Evergreen and decide to sign up tonight too. So I think Sonoma just got a boost, and there's not a lot of things that Sonoma can lead in, but I think our small size helps us be a little more thoughtful in how we operate, and this is the perfect example.
Well, before we have a motion, I'd just like to make a comment also, and thank you, Jack, for your comment on the solar panels and Skype. This is a project that currently is involved in the county. But Carol, correct me if I'm wrong, we also do put money together in a program for commercial businesses for solar panels. Is that correct?
Yes, actually, we're just updating our business matching loan program. We just met through the Economic Vitality Program and reviewed that, and we're adding solar upgrades to the business matching loan program. So yeah, we're really shifting our focus on that loan program as well.
All right, and then I can remember sitting here back on April 1 in 2009 when I was on council, and I put forth an agenda item to be the first city to join Regional Climate Protection Authority. So the city of Sonoma was also first at that time as well. So this brings me back to that wonderful feeling again that we are leading first, and we are a small city. Usually that action is not taken by a small city, and this is something that I also thank staff, especially Carol, for her work on this particular issue. So with that, is there a motion?
I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve conversion of City Sonoma Clean Power electrical accounts to the Evergreen program.
I'll second that.
So we have a motion, we have a second. Do we have any further discussion? Seeing none, roll call vote.
Hundley,
Aye.
Councilmember Cook,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Agramonte,
Aye.
Councilmember Edwards.
Yes.
Mayor Gallion.
Aye. So with that, we have a 5-0 vote for making history here tonight in Sonoma. Maybe that's one clap I'll allow. It's time to celebrate. All right. Item 7C, which is discussion and consideration of input received during public testimony on the recruitment of the city manager for the city of Sonoma. And with this, I'd like to turn this over to Carol Giovannotto.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Gallion, members of the City Council. I will open up this item with a few comments. City Council is in the process of securing a new city manager. Applications for the position closed this past week, and the interview schedule will begin on October 20th. So prior to interviewing final candidates and in an effort to gain an understanding of the qualities the council should consider when filling the city manager position, the council is providing the public with an opportunity to speak directly to the council and provide comments on the preferred attributes, characteristics, and knowledge base needed for the new city manager. City manager position is governed by the city's municipal code, and the process is being managed under the direction of the executive search firm of Peckham and McKenna. Although many of the recruitment procedures are held under confidentiality statutes, the engagement of the successful candidate is critical to the success of the city. The council is providing this open public forum to assist them in finding the most qualified individual to fill the position as city manager. And right now, before we open to public comment, I would like to introduce Bobby Peckham of Peckham and McKenna to give an overview of the process to date and the employment market statewide, and kind of just speak to the public a little bit and through the council, and update the public here and the public watching on the city manager recruitment process. So, Bobby?
Thank you, and good evening. I'm Bobby Peckham, president for Peckham and McKinney Incorporated in Roseville, California. I've been working with the council in recruiting for your next city manager. As your city manager has just shared with you, we had our filing deadline about a week ago. We've received a total of 46 resumes from interested candidates. And at this point, I am reviewing those resumes, screening them down, and looking forward to hearing more about what your community is looking for in its next city manager. Just to give you a quick overview on city manager recruitments in general, here in the state of California, we have countless city managers that are currently retiring and have been over approximately the last decade, I would say. So many baby boomers that have been in the profession for many years, and they are now retiring after the recent recession that we had. So many city manager searches have been going on. I've conducted 50 or so over the last 5 years alone. There are many going on right now, as a matter of fact, across the state. And what we're seeing in the industry is that as so many of these baby boomer city managers are retiring, that next generation has yet to be seen. There seems to be a bit of a gap of folks that are approximately 40 to 50 years old that are ready to move up into city management positions or willing to step up into city manager positions. So we have many at department head levels throughout local government, many at the assistant city manager level, but many that are not quite anxious, if you will, to move up to the city manager level. So I have seen the candidate pool shrink over the years. When I got into local government executive search almost 30 years ago, we used to receive hundreds of resumes for positions like this. As a matter of fact, I've watched over the years as Sonoma has had various city manager searches, and I believe many years ago I actually participated in part of that process. But what we've been seeing is that those hundreds of resumes have now come down to approximately 50 or so. Another search that I'm conducting had 35 applications for a city manager search. So I was very pleased with the number of applicants, although I'm looking for the very best people for you. So from those 46, I'll be doing some further screening throughout this week, and next week I'll be meeting with you to make my recommendation of the leading candidates. This is actually a perfect time in the recruitment process to receive updates from you, as we did this evening, in terms of what it is that you're hoping to find in your next city manager, as well as hear from your community, to receive much more input, so that as I'm continuing to do my screening and my preliminary interviews, I can be screening for those things that your community is looking for as well. So I welcome the public input and appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So with this, we'll go ahead and I just wanted to see a show of hands of people who are going to comment tonight. Okay, I think that's well within our realm. So with that, I'd like to welcome you in your 3 minutes to just speak on public comment.
Thank you, Council. Larry Barnett. I'm sure and hope there will be an opportunity to appreciate Carol sufficiently for her years of service to the city, and I'm looking forward to doing that. So when that date is scheduled, I'm sure you'll let us all know. I had the opportunity to participate in a couple of city manager recruitments and hirings while I was on the council, and it's a very interesting process. And gratefully, we ended up, at least while I was doing it, with a wonderful city manager or two. That said, there are some times change, and there are some things about the nature of the community that's changed in the world around us. So I'm just going, I know I'm hoping that the material I sent into the city got in front of you, so I'll just touch on the high points, which is that I do feel that it's important to have a city manager who lives in the region. I think it just provides a day-to-day experience of life in this town that another arrangement with someone living outside the community just can't have. Small town management to me is a must. It can't be someone who comes from a big city. I think it goes without saying, this person should be personable and outgoing and eager to communicate, and also prepared to volunteer in the community. I think, once again, becoming involved in the community is an essential part of understanding the community. I think transparency in government is a theme that we're going to need to put more emphasis on. So whoever comes in needs to understand and be committed to a very open process, both with the use of technology and other techniques to make sure that everything about government is as viewable and understandable as possible to the public. That requires superb listening skills and an openness to the public. I'd like us to hire someone who continues this tradition of welcoming public input and appreciating what the public has to offer. Rigorous professional standards, of course, is something that I'm sure you wouldn't accept any less than. And finally, a city manager who understands some of the character of this community. For example, your commitment to the environment tonight is quite clear. I think we have to have a city manager who's on the same wavelength as you. And just as Carol appreciated what this opportunity meant for Sonoma, whoever it is we have going forward has to understand your priorities of housing, affordable housing, diversifying our economy, and appreciating the concerns of the environment and the citizens. So I wish you luck with the process. It's actually a pretty interesting and enjoyable one for those of you who haven't done it before. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tom Conlon again. I appreciate the opportunity to talk on this topic. I did review the 3-page brief on the position, and I like the emphasis on many of the things that are in there. Obviously, fiscal responsibility and tourism are important. Tourism experience is important. We definitely need someone who has experience in the issues that come before you all the time. So housing, obviously, the climate action issues. I think to evaluate these things, we need someone that's data-driven and very quantitative in their orientation. I think that's something we hope to find in our next manager. It's just a trend in all professional areas now. And so to take advantage of the planning renaissance where those qualitative skills and those quantitative skills are coming together in people. So I look forward to getting more of that here in the city. And obviously a knowledge of urban planning, especially cities of our size, urban planning best practices. Finally, I think, I'm sure I could come up with other things, but close on an appreciation for Sonoma's unique history and our valley and the relationship Sonoma has to a population largely to the north that is, to be able to heal some of the cultural and language issues that we have in our valley that I'd like to see our new city manager be understanding of and appreciative of those challenges. So, and to tourism, someone who's sensitive to the life cycle that a tourism community moves through. There's a model called the Tourism Area Life Cycle that was prominent. I believe Butler is somebody who wrote this up. And there's a good deal of research on the stages of a city's or any area, resort or any area, as it evolves and as the tourism supply and demand dynamics change. And so we should have someone who's been through that before or is at least sensitive to those issues, because I think we're at peak tourism right now if we're not careful, and we don't want to hurt the goose. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Fred Allebach, 19550 8th Street East, and I hope that Bobby will be able to have access to all of the letters that were written to the city so she could review those as well as the public comments here tonight. Some of the things that I had thought of was that the new city manager should have a liberal arts degree. When I'm reading the New York Times or I stumble across Fortune magazine or whatever, I see that people who are too specialized sometimes aren't adaptive enough or they're not flexible enough. So I think that it would be important that somebody has the humanities experience to know about, you know, the history of people, of anthropology, of literature, and then develop the critical thinking and soft skills that you get from a liberal arts degree. And I would hope that somebody was at the beginning arc of their career and not somebody who was, you know, towards the end and looking at checking out later. And somebody maybe who was from the North Coast who's familiar with our area and not from an inland area that was from a different culture and different priorities and issues. And I would like to see somebody be as responsive to community as to business interests, and also aware of the sustainability paradigm, particularly as it relates to climate mitigation and necessary changes to our business as usual processes that we have. So those are the general things that I had. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Late mail.
Patricia Cullinan. As a citizen committed to promoting history in Sonoma and a historic preservationist, I believe that it is important for Sonoma's new city manager understands and respects Sonoma's history and its significance in California history. There's a critical balance that needs to be managed between new development, rehabilitation, restoration, historic preservation, and protection. I would appreciate a city manager who is supportive of all the efforts to promote the importance of history in Sonoma by viewing historic buildings in Sonoma as a form of public art, understanding the fragile nature of our historic resources because of their limited number, protecting and promoting the value of our historic resources, understanding that these historic buildings represent stages of Sonoma history and are the physical manifestation of the character of the Sonoma that translates into our identity, understanding the correlation between our historic buildings and economic drivers, understanding the cultural landscape is one of the reasons people choose to live here and visitors come to Sonoma. Appreciating and respecting the mission and the goals to establish a railroad district, other historic districts within the city, establish a cultural corridor in Sonoma, and strengthen the cultural element of the Sonoma General Plan. I know that's quite focused, but I figured, I get it all in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Anyone else wishing to speak?
I'll add a few thoughts on this. Jack Wagner, West Napa. Want to second everyone's priority of having an appreciation for Sonoma and for our historical values, the cultural diversity that we have, and I think watching this meeting tonight would be a good briefer to get them up to date. Outside of all the educational and professional experience that I'm sure Bobby will go over, I want someone who actually approaches leadership as like an art or as a pursuit. I go and I just pick out random books from the thrift store and grab a few off my growing stacks of books in my house. They're just on general stuff on leadership, managing on the edge, like someone who has approached conflict. This is about how to use conflict to further your team. And maybe a little less serious point, but not necessarily someone who's a sports fan, but someone who understands, why, Bruce Bochy and Stephen Kerr are such great managers and why those teams are so successful, and that it's not a bunch of individuals striving to make individual goals, and it's a team that's trying to create something, that's trying to make a legacy, and that's what we really want here in Sonoma. There was a quote here out of Monday morning. It's a little cheesy book, but I opened it up and found something I'd circled a while ago, and it says, "Never lower your standards just to fill a position. You will pay for it later." So I think in the pursuit of finding a city manager, and also a quality of that city manager, would be to understand that kind of principle. So thank you guys, and have fun.
Thank you, Jack.
Amy Harrington. Many wonderful, thoughtful comments tonight. I would second them as well. One additional quality I would hope we could find would be somebody that had a real sense of how to include the Latino community and what to do with Spanish speaker. I think would be wonderful. In terms of our city website, whatever we can do to really consider ourselves a valley, but for people that are working here to also include the Latino community and have that as part of our mission to make sure that we are being inclusive. I'd like to see that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak on this? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public comment area and back to council. Does anyone wish to give any future direction? We have had several sessions, so I think our representative, Mrs. Peckham, there is got her direction from what's come forward here tonight, and we'll be talking to you at a venue soon. All right. So we'll move on to our next item, which is regular calendar. City Council is successor agency. There are no items. Council member reports and comments. Anyone wishing to speak?
Well, I will jump in. Thank you so much. Let's see. Waste Management Agency, we met, and one of the things we're very lucky with is that we have our own garbage company, John Corrado, who's working on getting those permits ready for the compost facility. Other cities, Windsor, Santa Rosa, are looking for those as well. We received a warning, many of us, from the cities to make sure that you're equipped to handle the future regulations with respect to waste management. So I trust John Corrado for that, and so I appreciate his forward thinking for the city of Sonoma. Also, I'm meeting with a group by the name of It's Risk, and we were made a presentation by CVS regarding drugs and alcohol, especially opioids. And so CVS has a program, and they want to work with the Risk group, which I'm very excited about. And so we're planning on a panel discussion sometime in November with CVS and other people, other organizations that work in this with this subject. Also, I would like to say thank you to all the people that attended the September 17th Sonoma Valley Women's Club. I learned an awful lot about the history, thanks to Patricia Cullinan and others of the Women's Club, and it was a successful event. And one of the goals, besides sharing the history of women and their role here in building Sonoma, was we are going to have an event tomorrow night because we wanted to attract younger members. And I understand we have 25 plus women who are going to be attending, including Councilwoman Rachel Hundley, so I'm really appreciative. It looks like we met our goal. So I'm very excited about that, and I can't wait for tomorrow evening.
Well, thank you very much, Madeline. Anyone else wishing to speak? I'll go ahead and just report on my Ag and Open Space meeting. I received quite a primer on endorsements for an advisory committee. It was an interesting study where we were told basically, you know, what we would do as a committee, what we would do as individuals, what we would do as electeds, and it was quite informative because we had endorsed Measure K, which was for the community separators, and the advisory committee also endorsed the state parks Measure J. So we added 2 youth representatives. This is a program we've been working on for over 2 years. We consider advisory committee members to be ambassadors in the community when it comes to open space. And these are now 2 youth representatives who were selected from Santa Rosa JC, and we'll be working with the chair, Steve Rabinowitz, over the next year to have an actual vote on our advisory committee. Quite a forward process in having an advisory committee with youth representatives. So stay tuned for some more good things. I would say that most of my last weekend was occupied, not this last current one, but the one before, with the Vintage Festival. And isn't it wonderful that we can have something celebrated for 119 years done with an all volunteer committee? And it was certainly exceptional. Does everything go right? Well, not necessarily, but then it goes well enough that it can support itself. And I definitely feel that I have committed myself for next year to help on the committee because there are so many different things that need to be considered with an event this large. I wound up judging the light parade, which was the most fabulous turnout of community residents that I've seen in the, I think it's the 3-4 years that it's been in existence. And I was particularly impressed with all of the schools that came out and were shown at that particular parade. And this was done by a new team for just the light parade, and of course with our Native Sons of the Golden West. I think that this is in great partnership and cooperation, both with the Plaza Use Policy and with state parks, to make this an event that is actually downtown citywide, which is a wonderful effort, and I would support anything to continue to do this. And next year they're planning an even bigger and better show because it's 120 years. For the last week, my husband has been out of town because my sister-in-law has been very ill, and she did pass away this last week. So in respect to her and some of the family commitments, I will not be at a lot of events, at least through the end of this week. Madeline has been kind enough to step in when necessary, and I certainly appreciate that. My husband has received many acknowledgments on Facebook after his posting, but I will still have my office hours on Wednesday from 11 to 12, so for those who are planning to come, please know that I'm not canceling that. But any other public engagements, I will be not in attendance for the rest of this week. So, with that, if there are city manager comments and announcements, including announcements from successor agency staff, this would be the time.
Just a couple quick announcements. City Hall will be closed on Monday, October 10th in observance of Columbus Day. So the public should take note of that. We also have on the city's website, we have information posted on all the city's 3 ballot measures. So for the public, you can go to the city's website and there is information posted there. And then also we had the Economic Vitality Steering Committee meeting this past week. We did discuss and are making updates to the business improvement loan program. As I announced earlier, we're going to be expanding some of the definitions of what types of expenditures will be eligible for that loan program, especially including some climate action expenditures with lighting and solar, and we're really looking to expand some of those definitions. So stay tuned. We will be having the new loan program documents probably within the next 30 days posted on the city's website. And also we're updating, working with the chamber on the annual business survey, adding some new questions to the survey just to get some additional, seeking some additional information on how businesses are doing both in Sonoma and Sonoma Valley. So that survey will be going out as well. So it was a really good meeting, great working with the steering committee and the partnership with the chamber. So anyway, that concludes my remarks.
Thank you so much. With that, we'll entertain comments from the public. And again, these are items not appearing on the agenda.
Patricia Cullinan, I'd like to announce today was the first day of the Sonoma Valley Historical Society's archivist. Soon we'll have digital access to our archives, and I think that will be a great benefit to the city. Anybody who wants to volunteer, we're welcoming you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patricia. Anyone else wishing to make public comment? Seeing none, then I will adjourn this meeting until 10/17/2016. So thank you very much.
Located at 815 West Napa Street. For more information, you can go to SonomaPaintCenter.com. Underwriting is provided by